Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Sunday, December 15th. Thank you for joining me today. I think today is going to be an important follow-up and specific around the topic of drones and the conversation of Syria, Gaza, and Israel. But ultimately, in the follow-up conversation, it's really important to, I'm not going to tell you to go back and watch my show right now for so many hours before we get into today. But what I discussed yesterday, there's going to be a lot of important kind of precursors to the conversation today. But the one thing that I'm going to highlight that we're going to get into right at the gate is again, based off what I was saying yesterday in the conversation around very real conversations being very regularly used to manipulate people, to point to something, for example, that might very well be taking place that is very clearly a psychological operation, or something that might not be there at all that's meant to distract you in other ways. And so one thing I want us to think about is, whatever this is, the drone conversation, it's so very obvious that this is supposed to be focused on. And I think that's always something we have to highlight, which then doesn't mean that we should think the opposite is true. The reality always needs to be that we shouldn't assume anything. We should always be taking it one step at a time and waiting until we can prove something, and even then questioning whether we're missing something. My point, though, is that when we see this kind of pulling out all the stops, congressmen calling for action, this being discussed on every single channel, left or right, all of the usual suspects out there harping all sorts of points that, there are very hyperbolic and emergency broadcasts, all this kind of stuff happening. And as far as you look around and you go, what do we actually know right now? What can we prove? Even the articles I'm going to show you from mainstream platforms, it's 99%, if not entirely, subjective, anecdotal information, which still is important. It still has a relevance. I still am interested in what people have to say and personal firsthand experience. But in what other circumstance do you find these kind of propaganda platforms laying out a bunch of narrative for you with nothing, especially with what's going on in the world, pretty much exclusively when it is some kind of an agenda? Lying wholeheartedly about what's going on in Israel. It's very clear. So as we see this story going just haywire right now, I think it's important to ask whether everything, even the corporate media is saying, is true. What is the objective around this? Because I think it's very obvious that, and I'll go into this more, I'm just kind of the precursor here, that our government, as everybody, including most of the mainstream alternative media, it seems, are able to point out that, well, just using a little bit of logic, it's pretty clear that they would not allow this to be continuing the way that it is. Now, that's where you get this kind of shoehorned in, well, it's Biden doing this against Trump, which I'm certainly possible, other than my opinion being that your government is your government. And very obviously, in most ways, which I'll make a point early today, still working in unison. Trump and Biden working together in regard to deals with Ukraine, which seems to kind of throw a stick in the spokes to the argument that this is some kind of a back and forth, left versus right, Democrats destroying the Republicans terrifying the Democrats. It's this weird, obsessive folk, people don't want to give up on that they have invested what they believe in on this idea that this is how the world works. And I think every day we see more examples that it's pretty clearly not the case, outside of people who buy into that and act accordingly, believing that's the case. So we're going to start with the drone conversation today and going through what I think is an important connection. And I want to stress that it's simply just a connection point, another data point. And I'll say right out of the gate that I think it's easy to begin to see. I'll say it like this. Is it possible that I'm choosing to find a connection to Israel? Obviously there is a connection that I'll show you, but is it me trying to find something in this story that connects to Israel? Certainly possible. Even I could just flat out say yes, because I think it's important to connect what Israel is doing, because I think it's a very central conversation in what's going on in the world. At the same time, is it possible that I am just making that because I want, it's always possible. And I do consider these things, that it's more me. I guess the reason I'm saying this is because I get a lot of people saying, like, same with during COVID-19, that this is an overfocus. That instead of just addressing the story, it's about trying to draw lines back to all the same things. But that's not ultimately what I'm doing in any case. I look at these stories and I look for the information that's relevant. And I just happen to come across information that seems to connect this, an Israeli arguing that this is connected to something that's from Israel. And I said, oh, that's fascinating. Obviously, there's a very important reason we should make sure we suss that out. My point is, on the other side of that, a lot of people would go, oh, okay, well, that's I'm not going to, that can't be true. I'm not going to look at that. We know that's how a lot of partisan stuff works. And the more I tugged on these strings, the more I found, okay, this is interesting. And I found you would find it important. Now, it's just another data point in the conversation about many different moving parts to what this is, where it could be the United States and Israel and different groups together. It could be Iran doing this against the United States, and they don't want you to see that. But we'll go through why some of these really clearly don't make sense. Question everything. Be very careful not to fall into these kind of partisan-laden narratives where it seems to be basically zero information other than somebody behind them saying what they tell you their sources claim that we can't verify, and just wait till we can prove these things. I think it's very important. We're also going to talk about the first part of it, really kind of following up on the information that we kind of cut off on yesterday's show in regard to Israel in particular, with some new points that I added that I think are very important. And then, of course, the main part of Syria coverage that we added, again, more things to. And I think the most pressing, which I put in the title, is and it's almost like it's hard for me to make these. To me, these things are so transparent and that we've already covered, but yet for a lot of people, it is still a bombshell point to hide that they're annexing more of Syria, or that they're provably their people are on the ground executing religious minorities on video. And the point is that, like, today or tomorrow and the next day, these things should always be headline news, and they just kind of blend into the background. But my point is to follow up on this again, even though we've been covering this the last week, that it is the reality that the U.S. and Israel are backing ISIS patch-wearing extremists and a lot of other elements, Al-Qaeda connected terrorists that they've been telling you are bad guys, to take over Syria. Israel rushed in immediately and started taking more territory, occupying more elements beyond the Golan Heights, which is the important part, which was already illegally occupied, and then is turning around and saying, we don't want any issue with Syria. We don't want any conflict, as they're currently bombing in Syria, and as the United States currently occupies a third of Syria, one of the most important elements, while acting like we hoping this can revitalize Syria. It's so transparently dishonest, and I still am of the mind that most people actually see it. That's where we get to the point about what we can do to cause action here, but that's a different conversation. So we're going to follow up to give you more of the up-to-date on what's going on there. And a few other parts I think fit into there. So we're going to leave it there to start, but I want to jump right into the drone conversation. Now, this really did stand out to me today. And, again, as much as I put like the disclaimer out there to begin with, it's really because I worry that people will dismiss things because of the opposite reaction. Even if I am, let's say, overreaching to try to find this connection. In the same way, a lot of people, which I really don't think I am, a lot of other people in this opposite side of that would ultimately refuse to look at it for the same reason. So always consider that these things might be playing a factor on how we read these conversations. So right now, with the way this is going, up until this point, there's been nothing but hyperbole. I mean, other than the obvious videos, which even then, I got to be honest, which I always am, most of these points that we get into, I mean, like I'll show you a post from Alex Jones from today and a post from, I think it was Zero Hedge, that referenced a former congressman, and these are immediately being shown even on Twitter. Nope, that's not what that is. Nope, those are just star constellations behind the tree. Nope, that's an old video from 4 years ago. And it just keeps happening. And and my point is there's very clear, provable videos of anomalous drones. But if that's all we're really talking about, is the only story that influencers and politicians and governments are telling us to think a certain story? Yeah. That's not to say that it might not be exactly what they're saying, but that's kind of where we are right now, where everyone seems to be confused. And the government, which, by the way, includes all of your government, not just the part that's currently pretending to be in power, but the government, isn't doing anything about it. And they're acting like, well, we know it's not dangerous and we know it's not foreign, but nothing else beyond that. I mean, it's just so transparent. Now, let's put it this way first. Is it possible this is just the Biden administration conducting some kind of specific agenda? Well, first, yes. And which doesn't include Trump? Yes. And then even more so in the context of trying to do it to go after Trump for some reason? I mean, obviously that's possible. But if we want to consider that point, if we want to consider that this is some kind of divide concept, we have to ask ourselves, what is the real point? What's the benefit? Right? If the Democrats are on the way out, Trump's administration's coming in, the argument is it's about trying to derail Trump's administration. At least that's coming from some of the mainstream alternative media elements. But why does that make sense? I mean, obviously, there's 1,000 other ways that you can conduct this. Well, you take a step back and you start looking at the moving parts and you go, okay, who really benefits from what this is right now? Well, there's very clear points to make. Now, who benefits is not the only thing you should ask. But K Bono, the who benefits from a situation, is always one of the most important. So the obvious point is, okay, from just a government perspective, well, the technocratic infrastructure part of it. What, not even getting to the Elon part or in that yet, just the general point about whatever side we're talking about, the rationalization, or rather the problem, reaction, solution type of scenario to get you to call for the thing that might need to be applied to what this is. Whether that's about restrictions, we'll point out again around some legislation, which some of them would call Orwellian drone legislation that stops you from being able to take certain action, or ubiquitously begins to allow the U.S. government to use them for their own defense, but really just allows a ubiquitous surveillance network using these, or military sort of enforcement in domestic context. Obviously, these things are growing. Obviously, that's what your government wants. That's not an opinion. So this very clearly, even if real, even if Iran is going to cause that. It's sort of like the other things we talk about with gun legislation. There's very real things that happen, but then they roll that into gun restrictions. And that's the kind of point I'm making, even if real. Then beyond that, who else benefits from something like this? Well, it's very clear that there's a vein of this that's really trying to force in Iran. It's Iran's doing it. And that's coming through very specific Zionist supporting congressmen. It's coming very clearly from foreign elements that are saying it's Iran. We know that. But then you got this weird kind of deviation from mainstream alternative media who up until now seem to be blindly on whatever Israel and the Republican side of this thing says, but then kind of pull away from the idea of Iran in this and make it about just Biden going after Trump, which you can decide how that plays out. Maybe they just saw the truth, or rather that that's not the case. I mean, however you want to look at it, I tend to think it's about trying to avoid seeing seen as obviously blindly in one direction. But Israel clearly benefits from the manufacturing of consent to go after Iran, as Vance and Trump have been saying very clearly that that is something that's on the table. And when the end of today, once we get through the Syria part, jumping ahead, just recognize what I said yesterday. Netanyahu is already positioning himself against Iran. He's already saying, while he's standing on the ruins of Syria and killing minorities, he's going, is Iranian people, you need to be free from, it's happening real time right now. Already saying that he has better positioning to bomb Iran, and it's very real. And so this is pretty hard to miss. Then you've got the overlap points of Elon Musk and different people kind of floating these ideas of drone battles coming soon, which is kind of an obvious point, whether or not this happened. We all felt that. It's like saying deep fakes are going to be a thing. We all know that seems to be coming. And so it's interesting to see that. So let's go through the mainstream BBC article. I'm really not through, just one point I want to make. It says, what we know about mysterious drones buzzing over New Jersey. This is from today, really adaptation from like an older article, which, not to get into that, they do it every time. This was out yesterday or the day before, and they just updated it and didn't tell anybody. But it says U.S. authorities have been unable to provide definitive answers, saying only that the objects are not believed to pose a danger. So let me ask you this, to the public or national security. When in the world have you ever seen your government go, well, we're not sure it's a risk, but we don't believe it poses a risk, so we're just going to let it fly. We're going to wait and see how this works out. It's like, that is not what they do. These people would kill your grandmother if they thought for a second that it would hinder something they're doing 10 years from now. This is how they operate. And if you don't think so, you need to take a dance back through very recent history, but as far back as you want to look. For them to pretend like they don't know kind of for sure, but we know it's not really dangerous, that's a really opaque answer, which to me, and again, this is my point, this is all assumptive from this point forward, is that ultimately it would suggest that they're involved is the obvious first, which is kind of my thought early on this, which is kind of the easy, when you first look at these stories, it's pretty, historically, it's a good guess to go, maybe they're probably involved, but you shouldn't assume that. But that's an easy indication, is that they're trying to just kind of make it, if they thought it was Iran, they would be acting belligerently, or any foreign entity. We know that now. But it could be them doing this because it's some secret project, which many things are floating that. But the other possible thing would be somebody that's an ally of theirs. Now, if it was the UK, let's say, I think we already see how the UK and the US kind of deal with themselves when it comes to public stories. They're not usually, it's pretty different when it comes to Israel and the United States, where Israel seems to be able to do whatever it wants. And let's just say this was Israel conducting itself like this for basically its own operation, completely just disregarding any U.S. interest, and was doing this to spy on Americans or to test their drone technology or to see how the U.S. government respond. The point is, historically proven, the U.S. would not say anything about it. In fact, a story which I haven't even gotten into, there's so much to talk about. Candace Owens did a great interview about the U.S.'s liberty, which the one point I would make about that, since I bring it up, it's interesting why a story that's so very public, these people she's speaking to, the interviews, this is public information. Joe Meters is someone I've referenced who got arrested on the Freedom Flotilla in Israel. He was outwardly speaking about how, my point is it's very public, but it's interesting why it takes some certain people to just point at it before it suddenly becomes a large, that's interesting to me. And all it makes you wonder, and I think it was a great interview, is why that happens. Who is in control of that ability, or is it just something that we don't recognize? It's very strange, isn't it? That story has been so aggressively, thoroughly covered by so many, very, very well influenced or influential people, right? And so it's just strange that on a dime, all of a sudden, she's talking about it. Jake Shields and other people start pointing at it and highlighting these things. Even highlighting like a Guardian article that you could literally see. Anyway, the point is that's interesting of the controlled flow of information. I wonder why that is. Maybe the narrative is shifting. Maybe it's a positive thing. But either way, I do think you should check that out. I think she did a good interview with him, because we pointed him in the past, exactly who she's talking to, discussing how very clear it is that Israel bombed a U.S. ship. And then that was the point I'm getting to, is that the U.S. government literally covered it up. Check out the interview. There's a whole thing to get into there about what actually happened, the reality of how the U.S. covered it up, and how the Israeli government was knowingly trying to kill U.S. personnel, and they circled back and bombed again. And the point is that the U.S. government has been covering this ever since. So the point in this context is that something that any other dynamic would create, where they could do something hypothetically, if that's happening on our shoreline, and the U.S. government would go, well, we don't know, we're not sure. I don't think so. The only thing I've ever seen like that is with that weird relationship with Israel and the United States. More than one. Many different examples over history where the Israeli government does things at the expense of the U.S. government, and they just play it off like it didn't happen, ignore it, or just embarrass themselves. So that's what that says to me. And it goes, he added that he knows of no foreign involvement linked to drone sightings. So how can you know of no foreign involvement for something that you can't even really define or explain? That begins to show you, obviously, that they know more than they're saying, which is pretty ubiquitously being pointed out, which shouldn't surprise you. Now, of course, you get people that want to make this about the current part of the government that's in the White House, except it's such a straight, I made this point a few shows ago. This weird limbo is always so interesting. This time period between the president-elect being elected and then when they actually take office. It's like anything they want to pretend they have influence on, even though they usually don't, is all their benefit. But anything bad that happens in that time frame is definitely not my fault. And it's just so strange. And everyone, I'll say same thing in reverse for the president going out. At this point, it's the idea is that ultimately you could argue that this would be about them trying to use it against him and so on. It's just so muddled. Anyway, not to get too deep into the reality is that it's not verified. It's very it hasn't been fleshed out at all, other than things in the air and people trying to deny what's going on and a lot of speculation. Now, this was from yesterday from New York Times, same point, just saying, I think this is, oh, never mind. I thought that was a different writer. Anyway, the point is New York Times, the headline is, after weeks of drone sightings, New Jersey remains on edge. Or that's what they want from you, by the way. I don't actually know why this is a great point about privacy, that this would make you so uncomfortable. It definitely has every reason to make you uncomfortable. My point is, with everything else that your government's doing all over the place, or the fact that there are drones pretty commonly in a lot of places in this country, why all of a sudden people are just simply going drones in the sky makes me very scared and nervous and uncomfortable. I just think that's manufactured. Now it says, I think it's an invasion, this person says. I feel like our privacy is kind of invaded. Okay. So, she's screaming about how a foreign government's invading their privacy while she's got an Amazon Echo in her art room and a smart TV listening to her and her Apple phone dictating what she's saying, right? It's a funny thing that we choose to highlight. That's my point, is that this is being presented to you as something you're supposed to be outraged about. You're supposed to be scared. And even if we are, or should be, realize they want that from you. You wouldn't get this kind of coverage if that's not ultimately the reality. I think that's very clear. And she goes on to say, the kids are all asking, what's going on? And why do we have to close all our blinds? Don't worry about the camera that's on the light outside on your street. No, that one's fine. It's the random drone. We don't know what it's from. That's what we should be worried about. It's like there's ubiquitous surveillance and eavesdropping, or what do you want to call it, in our lives right now. Effing everywhere. I think we need to realize that we're well past the point where it's not selective. It is ubiquitous. And so that there's a physical drone that becomes the worry for your surveillance. Doesn't that seem interesting? Why would that be the worry? Yes, that's another aspect of it. But my God, your governments, Israeli governments through our country, are spying on everything you do using Twitter and everything else. So that stood out to me as interesting. And this just says, at the same point. Yeah, so that was all it really was, just simply saying that I feel like our privacy's invaded. And I think that ultimately that doesn't seem to be a lucid thought with what we're living through, right? And on top of the fact that it may be the very same government doing it. Now, this gets interesting when we start to hear the mainstream coverage. Now, basically everything I'm showing you right now is from yesterday into today. Jim Ferguson shared this. This is just from another News Nation report coming. I think he's speaking to a state senator from New Jersey. And the way that he talks about this. Now, I'm not going to say that it's impossible that the New Jersey government would be kind of cut off from like you wouldn't be sharing information with the federal government, or rather they wouldn't with them. But I just personally don't think that lines up. I think that these people are in communication far more than they're letting on. And I think that the local governments, and this is my opinion, are playing this up. Because ultimately, from their perspective, you know how the government works. And if you're getting answers from the Pentagon, or rather through the White House, from the military elements that we're pointing to, if I can discern that clearly seems to suggest that they know something they're not telling us, so can they. And a lot of them are saying that, by the way, saying that, like even Trump said, if you're not going to tell us what this is, then shoot them down. But I find it interesting. All I'm trying to show you here is that think about the way they're presenting this and ask yourself if this feels organized. Jim says, New Jersey senator drops bombshell on mystery UFO drones. And by the way, I also think that's funny because technically it means unidentified flying object. But we all know how the term UFO has basically become synonymous with aliens. And that's a lazy point, right? That's because that's how we are in a lot of ways, just with language in the world. The things become kind of muddied, right? Watered down. But I do think it's interesting how much this is being used, not even pointing to Jim himself, but to anything out there. That there's a lot of this in the conversation that's about aliens. And yet then even from the government, you get the reference of like UFO. Wouldn't you just say UFO? Why would you say UFO drone? That seems redundant, right? But I think he's just highlighting what's being stated. Either way, I think that's important. Now it says there are reports that UFO drones are now being seen all over the United States, as well as reports from UK military sites and military installations in Germany and Europe. Funny. That's interesting, right? Are we seeing it in, like just think about the selective locations that seem to be reporting this, which all seem to be on the same side. And it says panic is setting in as Americans get desperate for clarification. Now think about that. If nobody had pointed to this at all, if nobody anywhere was saying anything other than people online going, I'm seeing lights in the sky. And then other people in commenting, well, that's a star constellation. Yeah, it looks like drones. Maybe they're delivering something. The point is, without the hype from the partisan media and the corporate media, would we even be this worked up about it? The same thing we said about the COVID-19 dynamic before the actual bioweapon shot was released. The reality that thing they were telling you was everywhere. Well, if you weren't watching them fear hype and fearmonger about it, you walk in your front door, there's nothing wrong. I don't see anything happening. And now we know that was the reality. What's interesting is that the panic is setting in as we get desperate for well, that's what they're seeding into your mind. That's what the corporate media and the mainstream alternative media are flooding into your view and everywhere you look. Despite that there's an ongoing genocide, and we'll get into it about children being burned alive as we speak, or the starvation of children in Gaza, or the occupation of Lebanon, and the same thing's happening there, the ongoing ethnic cleansing in Syria, or let's just let's get away from foreign policy. What about the provable examples of the different chemical, as Caitlin Johnstone points, the great poisoning? We just talked about glyphosate. That's literally everywhere. We talked about dioxins and PFAS. Or how about something else? What about our own constitutional right? My point is there's so many very provable examples of things that we can document that are happening. And but here we are focusing on something that we're being told to be scared about with very little information. That should be the major red flag, all the hallmarks of how these things tend to work, even if it's actually a true story. Now it says calls for a limited state of emergency. That stands out to me. So now you've got the government, the New Jersey element saying we need a state of emergency. That, of course, should raise a red flag. A state of emergency when we don't even know what's happening. See, there's something clearly going on behind the scenes here. This is John Bramnick suggesting the federal government is hiding something massive about the mystery drones, which probably so explosive that they fear all-out public panic if the truth comes out. See my point? What does that even mean? So if you're suggesting, John Bramnick, that you don't know what's going on, right? That I just have a suspicion that they're hiding something big, but then jump that into something big that I don't know anything about that's so explosive that all out panic if it comes out, which clearly indicates you know something. You wouldn't just go this unknown thing I'm completely unaware of that might cause panic everywhere. How would you know that? What if it's a balloon and nothing else? Like, the point is that it's interesting that you can hype this. I think they all know something. I think this is a very clearly being hyped operation. Here's what he has to say. That's the wrong one. Did I not grab that? I'm almost certain that I grabbed that. Hold on a second. Shoot. All right, I got to grab it live. Here we go. Hold on. Telling you, I know I grabbed that. So this guy, I just basically already summed up some of the points I thought were relevant, but here is what he was saying to News Nation. There we go. Thank you for your patience. And here we go.
You know, this started as some questions, and now it's reached a point of almost insanity. You think about a United States senator who has to go out with the local police to look for drones. That's where a United States senator is getting information. We had
but right there, why they're going out looking for drones? If we don't even know what's going on yet, as they're relaying to us, what are you hunting for? What do you think you're looking for? What if it's a drone delivering something? What if it's the guy's drone from the corner? Which, by the way, are part of this. It's just interesting, right? Like, you wouldn't go out on some hunt for drones and document the whole thing if you can't even tell us what you think you're looking for other than drones in the sky, which clearly could be other things, local things, or planes, or anything else, which I'm clearly not trying to pretend that there are not drones. Like, there's plenty of evidence of that going on. But doesn't that seem to stand out to you as building a narrative of some kind of hunt for, it's very strange to me.
Briefing from the state police, the colonel in the state police. He was frustrated. He had no idea where these drones are coming from. Not only did I call for a limited state of emergency and the FAA shutting down the airspace for drones,
wow, but
also having the Department of Defense come in and answer questions.
This is exactly what these things look like before they're trying to jam in something, right? I'll get to in a minute, somebody's very excellent point about right now, as we look to the skies, ask yourself what else we're seeing, what legislation they're trying to sneak by, which really stood out to me for two reasons. But the idea is usually historically, this is what we get. You get the fake anthrax scare, which drives you into the Patriot Act. Like, that's how these things work, guys. And we can prove that. So whether he knows that, whether the local police know that, like, I think it's very clear, or maybe not that I'm saying I know that for a fact, but if hypothetically speaking, this is what you would get. This ambiguous hype of things we can't prove that drives into some narrative at the end point. Like, look back through history. And usually you get the coattail chasing partisan media that's just trying to jump after the story, and every new theory gets I know for sure this is it. Tomorrow it's something new. Tomorrow it's something new. And people just love it's entertaining. Like, mainstream alternative media, in my opinion, is far more driven today by just the fact that they enjoy the secret story, conspiracy theory. And most of these times, it doesn't even matter whether it flushes out. It's fun, right? It's the new reality TV. And they just lie to themselves and pretend like they're all out there chasing news stories. At the end of the day, and I'm talking about the egregious manipulators, are ultimately in it just to jump to the, whatever new theory gets thrown out, they jump on top and say, I've got something backing that up. We'll get to you. It's everywhere.
If the Department of Defense doesn't know where the origins are for these so-called drones, then we're in trouble. We always thought that if there was something in the air the size of a car, that the Department of Defense would know where it came from, what its origin was, and what its purpose was.
Now, right there, that's a good point, right? So we already have the reality of how our radar system, and actually the reality being they're far more advanced than they would let on to you. But if that's the case, that means there's one or two things. Either that they knew it was there and they can see it because they can show you on a radar, which means that they're very aware of what's going on. They're lying to you. Or it was some kind of technology that allows it to not be seen on radar. And if that's the case, then why would they be telling you it's not a risk and that it's not foreign? It's very clear. I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but the interesting point would be, if you want to guess further, that would suggest either that they know it's foreign, they're hiding that from you, or that it's their project and they're hiding that from you.
Now you have a United States senator going out with the local police, to look for fireworks at night? That is scary.
It is terrifying. Like Caitlin just reported.
Why is that terrifying? It's uncertain. It's confusing. It's a mystery. But why is that terrifying? Like they're trying to hype this story. If we don't know what it is, it could literally be nothing. It could be some company out there testing. This could be a promotion for a new movie coming out. My point is, it's only terrifying because they're jamming that in your mind right now.
President-elect Trump is calling for government transparency, which you are as well. He's saying
yeah, I'd love that too, Trump. Let's make sure we run with that during the next administration, huh?
maybe shoot them down if we don't get any more information. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I would leave that up to the Department of Defense. But how can the Department of Defense not provide information to the public? This is a shock to me. You know, I have a general belief in government, but this is taking me to the end of my belief that government is really being honest. Now, there's been some apparently top secret briefings, right, with Congress people. Now, they come out of that, and I heard Josh Gottheimer come, the representative, and he said, well, I'm not getting a lot of information, but I don't think it's a threat. So my guess is there is information, but they're holding it back. And
so in the chat, it's pointing out that it's the fact that they seem to be such a large amount of coordination. Now, I don't know if you mean in the partisan media or corporate media field with the narrative, or simply that the drones are coordinated. Either way, I think it's the same point. Trust me, I get why this is weird and could be unsettling. But the frighten, fear, terrify, these are the words you're seeing in all the corporate coverage of this and the mainstream alternative media. I mean, maybe you disagree. I think that's very hyped. I think at this point, it's a little bit of an unsettling mystery. We're not sure. Well, it's the same thing with the balloons, and which, by the way, a lot of the Republican rulership in the Congress are referencing the supposed Chinese balloons, the spy balloon. That's not what happened there. That story very clearly ended up where that was the opposite of the reality. And just like chemical weapons in Syria, they just run with the narrative, which a lot of the mainstream alternative media is pointing to as well. And I think that's important to think about.
Now what you have is panic. Originally some questions. Now you have serious concerns. And at the next point, somebody's going to do something stupid. So the Department of Defense.
So there you go. So when they do something, quote, stupid, and they turn around and go, Trump told them to shoot at it, that you can see how these things fall together if that's the way that goes, and would rationalize more restrictions on you, which I'll get to. I do think is one of the likely possibilities here.
Has to come clean with the American public.
So to your point, the FBI says they have no evidence of malicious activity or intent in these drone flights. What is it that they might not be telling us, and why?
Well, no evidence that this is a threat. What does that mean?
Right.
How does that help an average citizen and understand? No evidence of a threat? You mean they didn't do anything sinister yet? Well, yet. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not siding with anybody here, but yeah, that's pretty basic. There's no indication of a threat, which means there could be tomorrow. But right now, that's what he just explained for himself. Right now, there's no indication that there's anything happening that's threatening. That seems to be like the most important thing they've said so far. Now, they could be lying, but what I think is funny is he's just skipping over their statement, kind of alluding to the fact they're lying, which I would consider as well, but arguing that, it's kind of the suggestion that because they said that there is a threat, or either way that they're high. It's all this is my problem when you get into the partisan speculation. It's very easy. But I think it's important to theorize, to stand back and consider what could be, but don't just blindly lurch into the direction of what works for your worldview. That's so common today. And I think we all see it. It's easy to. We all do it. I've done it myself in the past. But it's important to question on your own perspectives, question everything. Stand back and go, am I missing something? And if you tend to do that repeatedly, you see it when you do it. You stand back and go, okay, wait a minute. But either way, panic. That's what I get from this conversation.
I probably can make that statement, and I have no top secret clearance. Based on what I've seen so far, looking out my window, it doesn't appear to be a threat to our country.
Right. And that's fair. But I would agree with the point he's making there, that it seems like a very dumb thing for them to report in the context of what they obviously seem to know, right? Not just that we can look out our window and see nothing's happening, but they have far more information. Clearly. How do they know it's not foreign, right? I mean, so that's the point I would highlight, focus on. But then from there, there's no real indication that you should jump to panic.
Okay. Why? Well, because I looked out the window. That's all I'm getting from the federal government. And every single person, Democrat or Republican, has been calling for the same thing. That's why I have some.
That should stand out to you. It usually does. When you see complete unison in the partisan field, very rarely does that happen. Typically foreign policy, wars, and Israel, and we're usually at war because of Israel. So I think it's important to consider the unison all of a sudden.
I'm concerned that there is something very secret going on, because how did people with the technology have no idea, except it's not, if they're saying it's not a threat, it must be something going on that's real top secret.
Senator, have you had this kind of discretion from the government before when you've asked them questions straight out?
I've never seen anything go on this long. And why would the government?
Let's also not forget that we have many examples going back years, in fact, or last year and before that, were drones around this base or drones doing this, or even the Chinese balloon point. Like, this has been something that's been being floated out more than once. And every time it's the same idea. Oh, we don't know. We're not sure. Like, it just is not. And if we've seen them act belligerent, irrational for something that turns out not even to be a threat, which they've done many times, and then now we see them kind of just broadly over the process of years not doing anything about this, it's not adding up. They know something, as everyone seems to highlight, that they're not telling us.
Allow the public to be so frustrated.
Right.
Why would the government allow a United States senator to be so frustrated? We heard this from both sides of the aisle. Now that brings me to the point that whatever these drones are doing, the government really doesn't want us to know. What that must mean is they're more. Or right, there's something they don't know, and they're embarrassed by that, which is one of the many possibilities. But you have left and right partisan media, congressmen, basically in line with this. That seems very telling to me. And I think what's important is that you see that, and as he pointed out, that it's causing people to get upset. Average people are upset and concerned. So there's a perfect environment to roll in with the solution. Every time. More concerned with us getting knowledge and being afraid of that information than having no knowledge and having all these questions. That's why I'm worried about it. It must be something going on that they can't tell us, because they are so fearful of what the public's going to do when they hear what the drones are doing. There's no way the Department of Defense does not know what's going on. We have not heard. Have we heard one word from the Department of Defense? I agree with that. And I also agree, other than the possibility that this is something that, let's say, Israel's doing, right, that they don't want to admit to you, which I guess even then would still mean that they would know something they're not telling you. Zero.
Unbelievable. And you are calling for a limited state of emergency and a ban on flying drones, like you and I just talked about.
And there you go. A ban on flying drones, which applies to you. So now they're restricting your ability to be able to use incoming technology, which will this will expand way beyond drones. Just like the biotechnology field and, or your, digital twin or your biometric data. My point, as always, we still barely grasp what those things will mean in the very near future as we blindly rush into this technocratic reality, right? So my point is that if they suddenly go, well, just for your safety, because of something we manufactured or whatever that we're using, that we're going to restrict your rights in that context, and that, by the way, then creates a circumstance where you have only government drones. So there's no ability for you to fight back or to stop them or, whatever else. And we have a situation where then you have another element of ubiquitous surveillance. I think that's very important, which, by the way, is one of the legislative pieces right now that are quietly coming through and are going to be rationalized by this exact moment.
A moment ago, the FAA has already imposed no-fly zones. The drones are still in the air. Nothing is being done. How would what you're calling for change the situation? Obviously, whoever is putting these drones in the air isn't really caring about these warnings.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because who's ever putting the drones in the air they're not violating the law technically. So if we put that in effect, we would see whether or not these individuals who are setting them up are bold enough to violate the law.
Okay, see my point? So right now, yeah, you could fly it if you want to. But if we pass this law, well, then we'll see whether they're going to. And if you mark my words, when that passes, it'll never get removed.
Right now, why should they stop, assuming they're a private entity? I never would believe that this is a private entity. But if so, why do we need, let me ask you a question. Is there some reason we need drones that badly right now in the air when people are panicking? Shut them down. FAA should shut them down. Who are they helping? All they're doing is creating panic.
I agree with you. To that point, what do you want to tell your constituents, Senator?
Continue to put pressure on, and it's not even state officials. I saw Larry Hogan said something the other day. This is the federal government that's not coming clean. And I'm not one of these conspiracy people, but if this continues, you're going to see conspiracy theories that, in my judgment, are create panic.
Too late. Literally what you're involved in right now. Like, it's just how funny this is. They love to point at the term conspiracy theory and just make it, whatever they deem to be bad or the wrong thought or the truth they want to hide. But he literally just laid out a bunch of theories about the government conspiring to hide that from you. You realize how dumb he just made himself look, or rather maybe by design, because they don't want you to realize that all that is just considering how you're being lied to by a powerful entity. Right? That's all that means. If you can't recognize that people conspire, especially powerful people, to benefit at your expense, just be seeing as how there's literally a charge. People get charged for conspiracy in this country all the time. Not conspiracy theory, but committing conspiracy in a business or it's common. So the point is, when you're pointing at somebody when you're theorizing, considering how somebody, whether an entity, whether a business, whether the government might be working together to lie to you like this, you know what that's called? A conspiracy theory. It's not a derogatory term. It is theorizing about somebody conspiring against you. So it's just funny to me, but you guys all know this. I mean, honestly, I think literally everybody knows this. They just choose to use those things against the people they don't like. So
come clean now. Everyone on both sides of the aisle is asking for this. And I'll tell you something, the citizens deserve better.
So the point, right, is that now we're in a position where everyone's on the same page, asking for begging for our own subjugation is how this tends to go. But right now, if you can't recognize that what the government he's pointing to is Donald Trump, is Biden, is Kamala, is Vance, they're the government. And right this moment, they're working together on something in regard to Ukraine, but we're going to pretend that over here, they're secretly working, which, anything's possible. But if we can't stand back and continue to see how many of these narratives are simply floated on the back of somebody claiming they know and somebody behind me claiming they know without anything to back it up, which doesn't mean it's fake, but how long this continues when we have evidence that does back up the things that aren't as fun, aren't as flashy, aren't as mainstream alternative media. Now, here is the first one we referenced yesterday. This is from Zero Hedge. New Jersey drone invasion, just in time for Congress to reauthorize Orwellian law. And this is important because what we're going to show you next is another article from today from Zero Hedge, which simply says new theory, drone sightings, nuclear snippers, which brings us to the main point of this. The reason I'm showing you that is, what I appreciate is that Zero Hedge didn't just update this article, which is what most platforms do. Even it just kills me. Mainstream clearly more than anything, where they just update it, alter everything, change the title. And it's just, one of the reasons I hate that so much is you share something like that on a platform and the metadata changes too when they do that. So all of a sudden the title changed on what you shared and suddenly your post doesn't make sense, which, it's frustrating. Anyway, the point is 14th, they're discussing the concern about whether this might be done by something, which clearly the indication is your government, in order to manipulate you to rationalize another Orwellian law that restricts your rights. And what they point out, which I think is very relevant to the next point, is again that Elon Musk has been really hyping this. 2023, drone wars are already a big deal. We ain't seen nothing yet into September of this year. And more than this, by the way, but epic drone war is coming. That was the 29th. And the next day, drone swarm battles are coming that will boggle the mind. Oh, and I didn't even say it because we're going to come to it next. The opening video was a Palantir video. Palantir released that at the game they just went to. And guess what it was about? Drone swarms. What a coincidence, guys. It must just all be a coincidence. And even they ask, what did Elon know ahead of time? Down here, it makes the point. Now, we're going to come back to this tweet, which seems to be, this tweet came out, technically, this guy posted it on the 13th of December. This account, they say, is deleted, but he's already come back, which lays out the narrative that suddenly is being, highlighted as this new breaking story, even though it's, and I'll get into why it seems very suspicious, other than the obvious direction it's pointing to. But it says purported drone sightings could be a psyop against you to manipulate Congress into passing the new HR 8610 Counter UAS Authority Security Safety and Reauthorization Act of 2024. And it says this bill would renew and reform counter UAS legal authorities and strengthen the FFA's oversight powers of drones. It says with current drone countering authorities set to expire on December 20th, the sudden surge in purported drone sightings and the accompanying mainstream media and social media panic might make a bit more sense, and an effort to push the reauthorization of Orwellian drone laws. Now, again, it's not just about whether you're able to use, which I think is important in the context of any of these conversations, whether it's a conversation of, not necessarily the Second Amendment, but the idea behind it about well-armed militias and being able to arm yourselves against potentially an authoritarian government. The reality being that this is one element of that. Like that they have access to these drones, well, so should you. Like that's the reality of this. And it's not, we're not talking about tanks and jets. We're talking about like a small little drone that you can fly and you could be able to use and look and, or obviously use to conduct warfare, which would be a crime, obviously. But the point is that is your right. And so what's interesting is that they're creating the justification, even if this is real, to reauthorize something that continues to restrict those rights. On top of that, I think that's the smaller real point in the context of what this will lead to, which I guarantee will be a call from, and here comes Elon Musk and Donald Trump and Vance and Thiel and the technocratic future, and they're going to rush into your AI efficiency and your drone response. I mean, I promise you this is coming, and we're going to see it roll out in this conversation. It's my opinion, obviously, but I'm very certain that we're going to see this next 4 years explode and blossom into that direction, as they're already telling you. I mean, Elon just can't stop being excited about it online, about the new things he's going to roll out. And the point is that you're going to see more drones for your protection, of course. But what that'll mean, as Derek has been highlighting extensively, is all of the different ways that this will rationalize the removal of your rights. More surveillance, more invasive, biometric tracking, all these different things we've seen, facial recognition. That's what these things will be doing. This is very easy to prove. That should concern us. Now, here's the new one from today. New Jersey drone sightings may be nuclear sniffers following elevated NYC radiation levels. Now, what's interesting to me, regardless of what they're just, saying, maybe that's related. The point is that this became a narrative on the 13th when somebody floated this out, which is right here. And this is Bob's News, says this account was deleted, yet it's the most believable reason I've seen in all these drones, which is interesting because it was an account with basically zero following. Now he's got more, but he came back, as he even says right here. Oh, I guess it just happened, by the way, because these weren't here a second ago when I looked. Yeah, he says, I'm back. I admit I was spooked by the response. Now, you can decide for yourself whether that's valid or not. That he's back seems to be a little suspicious to me ultimately, because I think it was weird that it was deleted, the account, like right after it started being put out. But what it says is, I'm one of the few groups of people who, we have no idea who this is, who know exactly what the drones are in New Jersey. This tweet will go in the void. I have no followers, but I'll share it anyway. He says, what you're seeing is our American-made nuclear detector drones, which is my point in showing this now. Is it's interesting that this is now being floated by another person who's the video's up. I'll show you. He's a drone manufacturer. I think we'll get to in a second. And you see a lot of these mainstream alternative media partisan elements jump in and go, we know it. We're proving it just right now. Despite right before that, we knew it was Blue Beam. After that, we knew it was fake. After that, we knew that it was Space Force. Now, wait. Now we know it. It gets, I just hope people can reflect on how obvious it is that people who are trying to lead these conversations are just jumping from one thing to the next. They're proving when clearly nothing's been proven. This is interesting, though. Who knows where this guy is, where he came from, who made this come out. But he's saying they can detect the presence of gamma rays miles away. That's the stuff we attribute to radiation. He says in the late 2000s, DOD needed a response to the threat of dirty bombs from ISIS coming to our ports in New York, which, if frankly, I don't even, whether that was real or not. Remember, the ISIS is an Israeli-U.S. proxy element, so you can connect those dots. It says they've been stoking up these drones for a while. Stalking, excuse me. Now realize we're talking about ISIS in this context, and it says some were deployed to Ukraine when Russia threatened the use of dirty bombs. which didn't happen. Russia was never threatening to use dirty bombs on Ukraine. That's a narrative that was spun up. But it says they look weird because they're heavy and have giant cryo coolers mounted on the giant horn antennas to communicate. Well, by the way, I've seen plenty of these videos that do not seem to suggest that kind of makeup. And it says, this is where I come in. The technology these drones have few suppliers, both for M-wave equipment and the high purity germanium. Now remember that, as we point to the few people that are technologically advanced in major drone creators. And it says, the same suppliers that are the backbone of my industry. He says, so what are they doing? Collecting information in how public will react, Psyop, and testing their ability to sweep a port city like New York for dirty bombs. So I guess technically he's arguing they are testing for something, but on top of that, just kind of sussing out how you react. And let's just say that's true. That's a good example of how there's dual purpose to these things. Then he finishes by saying, so what are they doing? Oh, that's what we just read. It says Jersey was chose because we're the closest port to New York. And it says, again, because in scenario we have a threat of a dirty bomb and the public doesn't yet know, the DoD needs to know how the public would react if they did this. What many don't realize is Ukraine is the reason we're here, he says. That was the first time we deployed them in a combat zone, but make no mistake. So interesting, talking about these drones being deployed in Ukraine. So that means Ukraine is a potential culprit within this narrative. He says, make no mistake, therefore protecting the homeland as DoD bought hundreds of thousands to act as swarms capable of sweeping a city. That seems very relevant now that we're seeing these things roll out like crazy. And it says, should note, not a military expert, but spent 1/3 of my career as an RF engineer. We're only hired in military, telecom, and finance. I'm speculating that this is just a drill, but know exactly what those drones are. My guess is Iran situation made the drill a priority. Make no mistakes, a dirty bomb is or was until now the greatest threat to America. Now, I could go along with that. I don't know if I think it's the greatest threat, but it's definitely a threat. But my point would be that I don't believe that the people that would need to manufacture a dirty bomb are the ones that are actually a threat to America. You could piece that together. A few going off in New York City and central LA would cripple us, which my point is any bomb would. And I think that's more likely a threat to come from a larger state actor that doesn't need to make a dirty bomb. They love to make it out to be some random ISIS element in a cave, when in reality, we're talking about the U.S. and Israeli funding that creates that, so realize what we're talking about. It says, and how do I know they're not foreign owned? Well, because I'm confident they're these kind of drones, HPGE. But even if you don't believe me, you can see that they have bright lights on them to keep the aircraft safe. Yep, that's obvious. These are FFA compliant. So that was floated back on the 13th. So now this article, they're simply highlighting this, which I'll play for you next, saying that they're basically doing exactly that. He's saying that these are drones based on a statement from somebody you don't get to verify that's in the government that says there were bombs from Russia, interesting overlap, that were in these areas. I'll let it play. You can listen to it for yourself. Now, I personally don't think this connects. I mean, maybe they are sniffing for some kind of nuclear technology, but the argument that this is ISIS, I'm not even saying he's saying that, but, or Russia or Iran, to me, it doesn't connect. It doesn't make any sense why this would be going on now with any of this. I mean, even if you look at what just happened with Syria, why would this be happening? That matters. Now, that doesn't have to mean that you can say, just because you don't know why, that means just ignore it. But it is important to consider. And it says, what you're seeing is American-made HPGE nuclear detector drones. I think that was the only thing I highlighted in there. So let's play this clip. And Joe Rogan said, this is the first video about these drones that has got me genuinely concerned. I'll comment on it afterward. I think it's my point earlier. With all that we can prove right now, like literally prove some of the worst things I've ever had to see in my life over the process of years. And I'm not even just talking about genocide. And this is what we're most worried about. Something that we can literally basically have nothing but subjective anecdotes from people that might know something to somebody they can't verify. Which, again, could be exactly something. My point is obvious, though. Why would that be what everyone's clamoring about? Same answer.
Hey, everyone. My name is John Ferguson. I'm the CEO of Saxon Aerospace here in Wichita, Kansas. I'm not normally a TikTok kind of a guy. I like watching this stuff every once in a while. But I'm a manufacturer of unmanned aircraft, military-grade unmanned aircraft, as you can see one of my systems here. There's all of these mysterious drones going on off the East Coast, and as a professional, as a subject matter expert, I wanted to give you all my opinion on what I think could be going on with these drones. I don't particularly believe that these have a nefarious intent. I could be wrong, but I want to give you the truth and what I believe. It's my own opinion, and I've not bounced this off of anybody. So, you know, if you think it's bullshit, whatever, that's cool. You know, I don't want to spread misinformation, as we know that there's a lot of that going around. But anyway, back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan had dismantled the nuclear program, and there were, with Russia, there were countless nuclear missiles that were disarmed and disposed of. Well, there were over 80, I believe. There were over 80 nuclear warheads that were in Ukraine that came up missing. Okay, we don't know where they are. Maybe somebody does, but nobody really knows where these are. And I speak with some pretty high-level government officials on this stuff, and it seems as though that is the case. So I spoke to a gentleman a few months ago who was trying to raise an alarm to the highest levels of our government, which they had their ears closed, about this one particular nuclear warhead that he physically put his hands on. He physically touched this warhead.
So we're told. We don't know who he is, where he comes from, if he's even real, or if that happened, or if he knows, if he said that and he didn't even, it's lying to him. Certainly consider this. But I just think it's crazy that this is the peak conversation, that this, because this is like right now, I was even just looking, Alex Jones's broadcast says, Alex has discovered the mystery of the drone invasion. This is what he's talking about. Well, they didn't discover it. He's simply pointing at the same information that we've all seen that was posted on the 13th. Well, what's interesting is that clearly this is completely subjective. It could be entirely true, but an honest researcher, investigator, journalist would not point to it as fact based on this guy saying he heard from somebody we can't verify. But I think it's interesting because I'm going to get to the point of where I think this narrative is coming from.
That was left over from Ukraine. And he knew that that thing was headed towards the United States. Okay.
Now, right there, that could be Ukraine, obviously, which I think is very important to consider, as much as many people won't want to connect that dot because Ukraine's the good guy. That's the lie they're telling themselves. The Azov movement is one of the obvious radical elements to all this today, but it also could be Russia. That's certainly possible, seeing as how they're involved in this location. But who else is there? Israel, the United States, plenty of other elements, if that's even actually what's happening.
Very serious deal. And everyone knows that the United States government, this administration, is pushing to get into a war with Russia.
Now, that's an interesting statement, right? I mean, I definitely think it's obvious that during Trump's administration, during Biden's administration, they were doing the same thing, right? They are the same kind of hostile elements. Like even, and what's funny is, as much as they tried to frame Trump as being like secretly owned by Russia, which drove him to be, in a way, many very hostile towards Putin in a lot of ways. But anyway, the point is ultimately the support for Ukraine and what they're doing in there. And it's not about left versus right. It's just to make sure my point is always is that it supersedes anyone's administration. The reality is that to say that they were desperate to get to war with Russia, it's a fair point to make that they're constantly poking and constantly trying to undermine. And maybe the argument is they want to create war with Russia. Now, I just stopped short of the logic of why that would be the case outside of something that, I mean, how do you think that benefits the interest of the United States? I don't think it does. So it's more about power shifting and territory and geostrategic control, right? And pipelines and whatever else. And that does cause conflict. But whether they were really trying to get to war with Russia, well, I tend to find that to be a partisan narrative about an anti-Biden idea that he's the one and Trump's going to be bringing that's what I see about these things. And reality being that your government has been hostile towards all these entities. But whether it's about going to war, I think we can prove without question right now that the wars that U.S. government's been in for decades have been because of Israel's interests. And I don't think they want to go to war with Russia. But you can decide for yourself.
We all know that. We all feel it. We all see it. Okay? Well, back up a few years. Do y'all remember when those drones were mysteriously flying across the Interstate 70 corridor from Colorado up into Nebraska, down here into Kansas, and out into Missouri? Well, it was believed that those drones were looking for radioactive material because there had been some material that come up missing here in the United States, and they felt like it was high probability that the nuclear or the radioactive material would be taken along the Interstate 70 corridor heading east or west or south. So from what we understand, they were out there trying to find this radioactive material. Now, drones, they have no reason to be in the air at night unless you're doing some type of ISR work, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, looking for bad guys, or looking for a victim, a search and rescue victim, or law enforcement, or some type of military project, right? There's no reason for a drone to be flying at night, really, okay? Because they don't see shit. So, unless you have thermal optics, drones really don't see stuff. You need to do mapping during the day. If you're going to do farming stuff, you mostly do it during the day. The only reason why you would ever fly an aircraft, an unmanned aircraft at night, is if you're looking for something, whether it be a person or trying to smell gas. We have methane gas detection systems that can detect gas leaks in pipelines. You really wouldn't use thermal optics for trying to find gas leaks, just simply because the only way you're actually going to find a gas leak with thermal optics is if the gas leak is aggressive enough that it has a difference in temperature. Because thermal imaging, it creates a digital image based off of the temperature variance. So whatever is different in temperature, it creates an image. Usually gas leaks so slow that it goes quickly into ambient before you can even see it. So we have special sensors that can detect gas leaks. We also have special sensors that can detect radioactive material. So with this gentleman that I had spoken with, who was trying to raise the alarm to try to get somebody in the government to say, hey, we need to work together to go try to find this nuclear warhead, none of that ever happened. They knew that warhead was on its way to the United States. That's all that ever came of it. Nothing ever happened.
Now, right there is a really important thing. So playing for a minute into it, that let's just say that's true. And let's also be very clear again that we know that it's completely unverifiable. And even if it is what happened, he could have been lied to. My point, though, is let's just, for sake of conversation, consider that. So we're talking about a nuclear warhead or some element of it, or dirty bomb dynamic that is being brought into the United States, and your government was aware of it and didn't do anything about it. Now, there's pretty obvious conclusions to form from that that's something they wanted, right? Or that's something that somebody else wanted that they were being paid to allow or blackmailed to allow. And then ultimately that suggests there's an agenda playing out. Now, that could mean that this is something being done to you and that's the end game, or that ultimately it's about a false flag. And how many times have we been hearing this? How many times has Israel essentially threatened that something's going to happen if we don't do what they say, because Hamas, because of whatever else? And how many times have we had evidence to suggest that they have plans laid out to effectively do so? You have to realize this stuff is not secret. Like everything else we talk about with Zionism or the origin point, it's disregarded, it's called racist, but it's very well documented. And in this context, I think it's very concerning that we have the hypothetical situation where they might be discussing a bomb that was allowed to come into this country. And now with these elements of the drones flying around, here's an interesting overlap to consider. Maybe exactly what he's saying is the point. And this is being done in conjunction with parts of your government with a foreign entity. And this is currently your government trying to find something without you knowing that happened. Now that right there, outside of the last part, would be an easy jump to go, well, that's Biden doing that. And they're working to, you know what I mean? Like they blame it on the current part of the government, but then why would they be searching for it? You see what I'm saying? And maybe that's because some other element jumped in to do so. And then why wouldn't they call it out or shoot them down? It's all theoretical. So that's always how that goes. We don't know. But it's interesting to point out that if that's true, instead of just jumping into it's being done against Trump to sacrifice his next, which is the general point you're getting from the mainstream alternative media, it's just as likely that everybody's involved and that you're the one being played.
This government did not do anything at all to help this gentleman raise the alarm and raise awareness that there is a very deadly weapon on its way to the United States. It's out there. Nobody knows where it's at now. It left Europe. Now it's gone.
That's a pretty dangerous thing to float out there, which is clearly being picked up. And everybody's talking about it. And now the idea is that we know that's the case, which again, we don't, but that's what most of the people talking about it that I see online are currently saying. Now we know there's a bomb in the country and that's what they're looking for and they're trying to hide it. And it's all being kind of lumped against Biden's fault somehow, even though, again, there's so many other elements to point to. Trust me, Biden is a criminal and he's absolutely part of anything we're pointing to, in my opinion, but it's not just about his administration. But I find that pretty interesting. Now, that is kind of the argument is that, there's this planted. I mean, think about what that creates. Just the simple hype that there is this secret thing here will rationalize all sorts of Orwellian surveillance and crackdowns and suppression and tracking, which is exactly what Derek has been screaming about for a long time. And that it's going to happen during Trump's administration.
So my own guess, is that these drones are not nefarious in intent. If they are, but I doubt it. But if they are drones, the only reason why they would be flying and flying that low is because they're trying to smell something on the ground. That's it.
But see, that doesn't really explain all that we've seen, though. I mean, other than the fact that maybe many of them are, a lot of them have been shown, are actually old or fake or something like that. But I don't know. To me, that doesn't feel like that answers all that we've seen. But maybe so.
No other reason for a drone to be flying in the air other than to piss a bunch of people off at night. That's it. So my belief is they're trying to smell something on the ground. Gas leaks, radioactive material, whatever. So, and do I think that they're coming up out of the ocean? No, I don't think so. Drones that are multi-copter type drones, not the fixed wing aircraft that look like regular airplanes, but the multi-copters, they only have so much battery life. They have hybrid versions that are gas powered with electric, but those can still only fly for a short period of time. There's no way in hell that any drone is going to go miles off the coast as a multi-copter and fly into the interior of the United States and do a bunch of work and then turn around and fly back. It's just physics will not allow that to happen. So these drones, I believe, are launched from a location that nobody knows, but I do believe that they're flying low enough that they're just trying to sniff the ground and try to find something. So again, I hate to be a pessimist or a guy that thinks, directly to the negative. However, I know as a professional, I mean, we build professional stuff for the military. I believe that they're actually out there trying to smell something that's very important. So anyway, let me know what you think of this video. I'm not trying to gaslight. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just trying to let people know that this is a serious deal. It's only serious for what the potential could be, or for what the potential is. There's a lot of them out there. They're flying all over. They're flying low. They're flying at night. There's no reason for it other than to smell something. So anyway, God bless. I hope you all have a wonderful Merry Christmas, and let me know what you think of the video. Thank you.
Well, very interesting. Now, as somebody rightly pointed out in the chat, it's interesting that when you have these kind of what seem to be setups for potential, action, maybe false flag, maybe using a real event in order to drive you in, which also could be the same category. But just as a coincidence, Ukraine joins NATO counter-drone exercise for the first time in history a few months ago. September 2024. 450 participants from 19 NATO allies and 3 partner countries gathered in Netherlands to test the ability of commercially available counter-drone systems to operate seamlessly together. For the first time, Ukraine participated alongside members of the private sector of research community. Okay, well, so if the argument is we're talking about dirty bomb elements or nuclear elements in Ukraine that have made their way back to the United States, maybe it's not connected. But I think the trappings of what we usually see in this stand out. And what do you always see before something like that? I actually almost think literally every time in the past you could find a training exercise that's right before one of these large events. Could be coincidence, but I don't believe in those. Now, as Joe Rogan said, about this clip of the guy saying this is the first time that I've been concerned. This is what I was pointing out before, and this is from today. He says, Alex Jones responds to this and says, I have confirmed with my sources in U.S. Northcom that this is indeed the purported reason the drones are swarming the New Jersey, New York area. But there is a lot more to it. I'm headed to the office to shoot a report that will be released today, which is what I'm just telling you. That's out right now, which is the bombshell exclusive. Alex has discovered the mystery. It's just him. Alex right every time, right? Despite the fact that this was something floated by many people before this or that guy. Of course, the point is I reached out to my sources in Northcom, U.S. Northcom. Okay. Otherwise called the government. Right. So this total outsider fighting the deep state reaches out to the government, the deep state, or just the government to be accurate, and says, hey, tell me what's going on. They go, well, that's the story you heard. I confirmed it. Everyone follow me. The government just let us know, but we're fighting the government. So we're clear. Okay. Nightwatch Nate responds, my sources in quotes, how is that any different than the legacy media clowns making up headlines by quoting official sources? Well, that's a good point. But ultimately, and Lionel basically kind of making the same point, says the same government that misled you about the Chinese spy balloon, COVID, inflation, Ukraine, Nord Stream, many of which overlap the Trump's administration too. So again, just the government, guys, and spun up narratives about life in America over the past 4 years, now expects us to believe that they're being truthful about these drone sightings. Well, Alex believes them. Now, of course, he could have inside sources that are not on the side. That's usually how that gets played, right? The white hats inside the secret drone. Well, I can point to 1,000 examples of him or anybody else on that part of the mainstream alternative side that reference things like, we know it's Blue Beam a few days ago, which now saying something different. Hopefully you're honest enough to acknowledge that, because that means that you're being told certainty and then the certainty changes day by day. Overall, I think it's interesting what the guy is saying, but it's just another data point. We don't know for sure because he could have been lied to. But where I think this connects is where it overlaps with an Israeli point that was made. Now, before we get to that, I want to highlight this article that came out today. Or, 13th. I guess I saw it today. I thought it was new. But even more relevant, goes back to the 13th. Title, Trump team in talks with Biden and Ukrainian officials about ending the war in Russia, which one point on this, which we're not going to get into Ukraine today, is actually giving me more positive indication that Trump may actually be ending this. But as you know my opinion, I kind of don't trust that it's going to be for the interest of Ukrainians. I hope I'm wrong about him. I hope I'm wrong about all of them. I hope it's just because he wants to help people. I just don't know why that seems to make sense for people, but I really genuinely hope I'm wrong. Either way, the point is, and again, Biden, same way, is that what he says in this article, I'll show you right now, gives me the indication that this may be in his interest to do so, maybe he just cares about him. But either way, it's easy to point out when this could be used to benefit his career or benefit his agendas. Honestly, I don't even care. As long as it happens, same thing with Gaza, that would be a very positive, net positive scenario to stop the slaughterhouse of Ukrainians. So I'll show you what I mean by that. I just wanted to point that out because I really hope that is the case. But I get the feeling that whether it was Trump or whoever they put into power in this position, that this was something that was probably going to happen in regard to a lot of overlapping Israeli-U.S. agendas and possibly even Russia. But what it highlights, here's just the highlight article. President-elect Donald Trump's national security team has held discussions with the White House and Ukrainian leaders as part of a concerted effort to find a way to end the war with Russia. Multiple sources with knowledge of the matter told NBC News. So let's be clear. You got NBC News, an obvious partisan left-leaning platform, reporting positively about Trump working with Biden and Ukrainian officials to end the war at the White House. Okay, can we clearly highlight the fact that that doesn't have, I mean, as always, there could be some secret behind anything. But what this seems to indicate is that Biden is helping Trump effectively carry this out, which will be a positive for Trump. Biden is literally seemingly helping him commit and complete one of his major promises to finish this before he even gets inaugurated, which will be very positive for him. So how does that line up with Biden's secret, long-term, nefarious plan to destroy everything Trump, or every Democrat, because they're all pedophiles, going after anything bad Republican? Well, I think they're all actively fighting each other for their own personal petty reasons, but they're all on the same team fighting you as well. My point, though, is that we have to stand back and realize that if what they're pointing at, or that this drone thing is some secret plan to undermine and destroy Trump's incoming administration, which Alex has been saying every 30 seconds for a week now, how does that make sense? And if this is the plan, why is he currently working with Trump to execute something for his benefit? And why is NBC reporting on it as a positive thing? You get my point? And it says the president-elect has vowed to end the conflict even before it's inaugurated next month, which is what I was saying, calling the casualties suffered on both sides a tragedy. My point is I just get the feeling from this, especially since Biden is working with him in this context, that this will actually come to an end, which would be a good thing. It says, I don't want to say anything about that. Oh, so basically they're at Meet the Press was asking if he'd spoken to Putin since his election. And he says, I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want to do anything that could impede the negotiation, which I have to be very clear. That is not what you'd expect from Trump, in my opinion. So that is a mature, measured response from Trump in regard to something that might actually need to happen. So historically, what we get is him trying to put himself in the front seat to look like I'm in control and I'm the one doing this and it's all because I made this happen and I'm the deal maker. Whether or not you feel he's the savior of your planet, you have to be honest about how he is very full of himself. He's a lot of hubris. Maybe you could argue he has a right to. The point, nonetheless, is that in this context, wouldn't expect him to be tight-lipped because that may hurt the negotiations. Where in many examples of the past, he rushes right over the top and gives you information that actually hurts him in the long run, or says the quiet part out loud about Syria. You see my point? So that's interesting to me. Again, does give me the indication that he's very serious about ending this, probably just for his benefit, but either way, net positive there. Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, has held several conversations with his named successor, Mike Waltz, which, one of the many rabidly Zionist, Israel-controlled elements in his administration, whom Trump has tapped to take over the position. A senior administration official and other sources familiar with the matter said. Now realize this is while they have yet to actually include Trump in the ethics pledges, as far as I can tell, unless I'm missing something. And I think that's exactly what I was worried about. I mean, I get it's going to get more and more opaque as this goes forward, but I'm going to make a reference about this, especially once we get past the inauguration. Now you've got overlap of very clear Zionist connected entities that have access to very top secret information, which probably already did, to be quite honest. But either way, it's more and more and more influenced and infiltrated. But the other point is that you have Jake Sullivan and Biden and the White House working with each other to have a peaceful transition, which seems to be like, I remember I made that point back in whether Alex or anybody else making the argument that this is the Democrats are doing everything they can to destroy what comes next. And I said, well, remember this, I don't see any indication of that. Could be happening behind the scenes. But when we get to a point to where we see hypothetically that it never happened, remember that. I just don't think people want to. I think they're having too much fun pretending we're in some kind of fight. It's crazy how serious it is. And how serious it is in certain context of their conversation, but then whenever it needs to be, it becomes a troll, it becomes fun, it becomes, there's a lot of dishonesty around this conversation, especially in this field. And here's where it gets more interesting. So David Paulides says, another opinion on the drones from an Israeli. Now, again, there's many of these you can find. This one is somebody who seems to be somewhat prominent or recognized from past situations. But to me, it's really irrelevant other than the fact that this is an Israeli highlighting an opinion about how Israel might be involved. But I want to stress, in no way am I claiming that we know for sure that this is the case, that Israel's involved, or that any of these are even what we are claiming they are. It's just another data point that I think is very relevant to flesh out in the in the context of the foreign policy dynamic today, and how obvious it is that Israel is very clearly trying to, infiltrate is a long time ago. Whatever they're trying to accomplish through this government is, I would argue just complete control, which might already be the case. I know that's very difficult for some people to think about, but it is objectively clear. Maybe not every element, but obviously that their objective is to control the outcome, which, by the way, is not even that contentious in the context of many other governments. Every government in the world is trying to manipulate the other governments for their benefit. The point is that Israel goes as far as to carry out suicide bombings and false flags and all sorts of manufacturing consent that actually takes American lives, like, the U.S. is liberty or whatever else. But Uri Geller, it says one of the world's most investigated mystifiers. So really quickly, where was it down here, I think? There it is. Josh Gustow points out something he did from before. And just to point out, here's an article of him saying, UFOs are real. NASA showed me an alien spacecraft that I've been secretly contacting ET for years. So just for context on who this says Uri Geller, or at least as they recorded him as saying. So with that in mind, he writes, my dear friends, I just received from this reliable source, so just like everything else, completely unverifiable, which you should consider, I will be speaking to my Israeli contacts this morning to verify if this is true. Let's do this too and see if he's reported anything else. Oh, there, I'll follow up with that next. This seems to be the next one. And he says, breaking, intel from a verified high-level source with top secret special access clearance, which it just means a source at this point. All those are words if you can't prove what he's talking about. And it says, just dropped the bombshell info on us, the mysterious drones being seen across the United States. He says, these are our drones. And he's speaking as an Israeli. Tracking gamma rays linked to possible WMDs in a massive counter-terror operation. The Office of Global Access, OGA, a shadowy three-letter agency, has deployed advanced surveillance assets to hunt for a stray nuke or a mass casualty weapon hidden in the east and west coasts. Mission objectives. So here's where you get into the argument being laid out of exactly what the guy was saying. A mission to investigate for potential nuclear problems. He says, detect communications tied to the device, talking about some kind of potential device. Mass casualty weapon is what he said. Partner with law enforcement for rapid response. Prevent mass panic while it's advancing intel operations. Those are the objectives he's highlighting. Assets in play. He says low altitude surveillance, aircraft scanning for signals, special ops units ready for instant action. So really clearly we're talking about government involvement. I think that should be very transparent by now. Cyber intel teams analyzing terror networks. Sources say this could involve a submarine breach of our SOSUS warnings nets or our WMD hidden in a cargo container or vehicle. The stakes are high and government silence peaks volumes. I'm right just there. The point is what he said first. Everything else, it's completely unverifiable at this point. My sources warn this intel is leaking now. Dirty bombs are worse. Could already be here. Okay. So to me, I'm not suggesting that this is any more indication this is the real story. I'm beginning to feel more and more this is a narrative that is being put out there. And whether he's tapping into what his Israeli sources are telling him, or that he's pushing this because he's part of it, or it's real. The point is that right now we don't know, but I think what begins to connect is that this seems to be something that's being driven. And I say that largely because of the way that this has been done by the corporate media, by the Western government. I mean, it's weird how this has become this very forceful narrative with basically no information. And it's not just the US, it's the UK. It's interesting. So here's what he says after that. So he says, friends, my answers remain unanswered, and my questions remain unanswered. There are flaws in almost all of my theories that are attempting to explain the mystery drones. For instance, if the drones are military-grade surveillance drones that are carrying out some kind of mission, secret mission, such as tracking WMDs, then why have they made no attempt to go undercover and prevent mass panic? Right? These craft have consistently allowed themselves to be seen as they, again, that speaks a lot to me, right? They could have done, as the guy was saying before, why didn't they turn the lights off? They want you to be seen. They want this to be recognized. And your government tells you there's no threat, they're not foreign. I mean, it stands out. Which allows a very easy, to stick your fingers in the middle of it and be like, it's them going after Trump, which is certainly one of the possibilities. But that seems to be a very self-serving assumption. The obvious overlap should be that they're all involved, seeing as how there's a lot of connective overlaps to the direction this is going. Space Force, drones, Elon Musk. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. But it says these craft have consistently allowed themselves to be seen, as they have been displaying bright, flashing lights and hovering for long periods of time over populated areas. Why would they do this if they are attempting to carry out a secret surveillance mission? Also, it is important to remember that the sightings that are now occurring in the U.S. did not happen in isolation. This wave of sightings all started many, many weeks ago in the U.K., with mysterious drones hovering over several U.S. military bases in England. That tells you something. After that, similar sightings then occurred in Germany over and over other U.S. bases. Think about so either this is a UFO going after only U.S. things, or it is a foreign entity that's only going after U.S. bases, but weirdly in many separate countries, which makes no strategic sense, really, unless there's something I'm missing. Or it's the U.S. government doing it, right? Or in conjunction with other elements. It just seems like that's interesting. And it says, so why would the U.S. government be using their own military-grade drones to conduct surveillance over their own military bases? This does not make sense, unless it's trying to set you up to respond to this. And he says, and I haven't read this yet. He says, so I previously warned it is likely that a number of possible cover stories will be pushed to the public. So any explanation that is officially offered or championed by the media will need to be properly examined and pulled apart. But perhaps whoever is behind these sightings is already achieving what they set out to do. Maybe the prime motive behind all of this is simply to sow mass confusion and create widespread anxiety, panic, and mistrust. Problem, reaction, solution. By highlighting the inability of the U.S. government, in quotes, to stop or prevent what is happening, to get you to call for your own subjugation, or in this context, if you don't think that's how it goes, to call for the response that they're already ready to roll out, knowing that they set you up to have that reaction. It says, ask yourself then, who might benefit? Exactly. I already made the point. There's very clear elements that benefit from this. And the people they're pointing to, even in the context of left versus right, it just doesn't connect for me. It doesn't really, there's 1,000 other ways they could have run something out that would have been easy to do. This is overly complicated and is a lot of moving parts, and it's already very clunky. I just don't think it lines up, but it certainly could. If the drones are in fact connected to UAP activity, then it is perhaps a push from their side, from the Ukraine, to try and force the U.S. government to finally disclose what they have been concealing for so many years. Or actually, maybe he means something in regard to unknown elements. Or this could be a push from the inside faction of those in the know who want to make it possible for the U.S. government to continue to conceal their knowledge from us. Now, this is about whether he believes in something else going on in this context. So these are all his opinions. Clearly from his old post, that does seem to be the case. Oh, look at that. There he is next to Donald Trump. I'll include this too so you can read that. Was that? Oh, that's right. Okay, so here is just quickly to reference that. Now this will suddenly be interesting to consider the fact that we have this guy in News Nation. This was from the 13th. Who was suggesting or saying with the sheriff, they're saying the same thing, that they were able to cloak their heat signature. So what I said then is the same, is that if that's true, they could be lying, but that'd be difficult to, that would be a difficult thing to hide. It then suggests that we're talking about high-level technology, which would suggest a foreign actor or the U.S. government, and it's something new that they don't want you to see. Right? So that makes sense with what we just highlighted. Now, these points are also relevant to this. There's more to get into here. I looked up the top 10 countries with the most military drones in the world. And what you'll find very revealing, and this is funny because remember, they just had these drone exercises and so on. This is new. This is from October 6th. And it lists U.S., Turkey, Poland, Russia, Germany, India, France, Australia, South Korea, Finland, all declining. So the U.S. reportedly having 13,000 drones. Now, if you go through this, what you find is a very interesting standout. Now, of the top 10, you have 1, 2, 3, I think it's 4 of them total. Oh, I thought it was 4. Maybe I missed one, but at least 3. I thought it was 4 different in the top 10 who buy their drones from Israel. So it's like, okay, wait a minute. So if they're making so money that they could sell them to some of the top 10 countries using them, isn't it kind of strange that they're not listed in the top 10 countries? That's usually an indication of some kind of controlled conversation, right? Here's what it lists out from Brave. Israel drone numbers. It says the Israeli Defense Forces operates a significant number of drones with estimates ranging from hundreds to thousands. Well, okay, that alone already puts them above the number 2 slot, which is Turkey. And it says, according to 2017 estimates, Israel accounted for more than 60% of the international UAV exports over the previous 3 decades. So like damn near everything else in this conversation, whether it's the spyware or whatever else, the 60% of the market comes from Israel. And they're selling these over the 3 decades to many other locations. Foreign buyers. Then it goes, IDF's drone inventory includes various types, such as Hermes 450 attack drones, Hermes 900 attack drones, Heron TP reconnaissance and surveillance drones, or Skylark reconnaissance and surveillance drones. 2023, Skydio, an American tech company, supplied over 100 drones to the IDF, which again, that's what's funny about that is how often that seems to happen, despite the fact that they don't need us to pay for their stuff. They're already manufacturing more than most everybody else, and they already have enough to buy. It's just you giving your tax dollars to support Israel's agendas. That's all it is. And it says the IDF has been actively integrating tactical drones into its ground forces with units using small drones, which becomes more relevant because we have seen more than just the big ones. Now, they simply write, they have hundreds of attack drones. Those are the big ones. They've got hundreds of reconnaissance surveillance drones, which are the smaller ones, but they've also got thousands of small tactical drones used by the ground forces, which clearly puts them above number 2. So I think it's very revealing that they would not be listed in most of the lists I've seen, or any. I actually didn't find anyone that listed Israel, which I think is the point, is this is how Israel operates. They're a nuclear ambiguity. They just hide. They don't want you to see, because it's clear there's nefarious action going on. That should be clear to everyone in the world today. So here is The Intercept from May 17th, 2024. An Israeli company is hawking its self-launching drone system to the U.S. Police Department, to U.S. police departments, plural, which is just like everything else we're talking about. So now you've got 911 call centers run by Israeli tech startups. You've got Israeli tech startups populating this country like chickenpox. You've got them dominating 50% of the spyware market that the U.S. is now rolling out in Trump's administration. You've got Elon Musk working with groups that are literally building out a you can't hide spy network of satellites around this country, working with Israeli overlaps. You got them rolling out spy drones, or really just drones the U.S. police departments are using, and realize how many times it's been shown that Israel infiltrates this tech. I'll grab that article since I bring it up. But the frustrating reality is how very documented this is, like everything else. This was our show from the 20th of September. Israel's infiltration of U.S. tech in light of the Lebanon pager attack. Remember, 5 years that happened. They seeded these pagers, they let them populate Lebanon, and 5 years later, they executed that, killed children, killed innocent people. The government covered it up, and the media covered it up. So the point is, if they're selling these systems to U.S. police departments, I guarantee that they're spying and infiltration on these things. That'd be my opinion. And on that point, everything else we're talking about. So is it not possible that they have these self-launching drones that were self-deployed? They don't want you to see that? Or, I mean, I'm just theorizing. There's any number of possible things. Or the reality that these are drones that are simply being facilitated through both of them. Now here, this is the one I was showing earlier. So I'm just reiterating the idea of the Orwellian law, right? The drone legislation. So here is a congressman very aggressively hyping the idea that we know for a fact that it's Iran. This is a very Zionist-influenced element.
Well, here's the real deal, Harris. You know, I'm also on the Transportation Committee, on the Aviation Subcommittee, and I've gotten to know people. And from very high sources, very qualified sources, very responsible sources, I'm going to tell you the real deal. Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago that contains these drones. That mothership is off, I'm going to tell you the deal. It's off the east coast of the United States.
This is completely, first I can tell, there's nothing that backs this up. Where do you think it's coming from?
Of America. They've launched drones, is everything that we can see or hear. And again, these are from high sources. I don't say this lightly. Now, you know, we know there was a probability it could have been our own government. We know it's not our own government because they would have let us know. It could have been some really glorified hobbyist or hobbyists that.
Can you imagine saying what he just said? We know that it's not our government because they would have let us know. That alone should make your suspicion stand up on that. Like that's crazy. Despite the fact that they've withheld damn near everything about, I mean, it's just so lazy to argue that. Clearly they would lie to you. They say so all the time for national security. But his argument is we know for sure it's not them. Guys, that's exactly what you would say to shift and pivot the conversation to the fact that we know it's Iran. There's only one real entity that's driving that. And this is why we see this aggressively through the Trump administration or just the US government. It's Israel. They're so aggressively driving that for decades. And now that we see this rolling out, it should be a very real consideration that this is why it's happening. And you're going to see the people that are going to stop short, as usual, and not point out the Israeli involvement with everything we're talking about, whether it's globalism, technocracy, Great Reset, all of it.
We're doing something unbelievable. They don't have the technology. But let's pretend that's possible. The third possibility was somebody, an adversarial country, doing this. Know that Iran made a deal with China to purchase drones, motherships, and technology in order to go forward.
Yeah, you mean like literally everybody else in the world. So now he's making the argument that, look, they bought drones like every other country you can point to. I mean, I'm sure there's some that didn't, but that's a pretty lazy point. So by that logic, the US government's more likely than Iran or Israel for that matter, because they bought a whole lot of drones and have been testing them right up until this point. You see, it's just a cobbled together narrative with nothing but, I mean, it's not even subjective. I mean, he's almost making these things up.
The sources I have are good. They can't reveal who they are because
they
are speaking to me in confidentiality.
Of course. So that means they don't exist, or it's, I mean, I'm kind of being facetious. The point is, to you or me, if somebody's watching, that's how they should take that. That means it doesn't exist, right? It's an anonymous source. That's the U.S. government style, right? That is or corporate media style to just float an anonymous source that claims from the U.S. government as opposed to actually doing your job, which is to speak truth to that power as opposed to blindly acquiesce to what it's telling you to do. Either way, he is part of the government, and he's clearly seeding this narrative because somebody is driving this through him.
These drones should be shot down. Whether it was some crazy hobbyist that we can't imagine, or whether it is Iran, and I think it very possibly could be, they should be shot down. We are not getting the full deal, and the military is on alert with this.
Look, you've given us some pretty dire information just here, and I want to make sure that our viewers are digesting this. Iran has the capability to pull up along our eastern seaboard and launch drones the size of an SUV.
Don't you love that? Breaking! We're about to repeat what he said with nothing to back it up as absolute fact because news. How absurd. What a clown that person is. This guy comes on and tells you something an anonymous person said, and you literally break and go repeat, listen to what she just did. The way she reports this. She is saying that as fact based on what he just told her. That's it. I mean, I don't need to stress the idea that these people are not actually journalists. It's just embarrassing that they pretend that way.
Eastern seaboard digesting this. Pretty dire information just here, and I want to make sure that our viewers are digesting this.
So somebody got in her ear and said, repeat that and make it fact.
Iran has the capability to pull up along our eastern seaboard and launch drones the size of an SUV into the skies of several states, particularly New Jersey, where we know the incoming president has a large home, also in the same county or nearby where some of these drones in New Jersey have been seen.
What? I mean, think of that. We should be laughing at these people, the way you just cobbled this together into the direction of what everyone wants to hear. You don't have anything to back any of that up. The point is that what she's highlighting is technology that, yes, they all are probably capable of. Every single one of them. If you think, the reality is, as I've said many times, which is funnily, in a funny way now being proven, despite people in this very side saying there are a bunch of people in caves, Iran is very technologically advanced. The point, though, is that so too is the United States and Israel. And the reality is that to claim that they have the ability to bring up whatever, a mothership is a stupid framing of this. I think that's meant to be weirdly overlapping with the UFO conversation. The reality, though, is that you can launch drones, larger elements of it that can release smaller ones like they literally all can. Now, the point is, they did it along the coast. Well, that would mean the U.S. government would be able to see that. And they've allowed it and are now saying they didn't, or it's not a threat, and we can prove that, which either means they're doing it or it's Israel or hiding that, right? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. That's where you get them sticking their finger in and saying it's against Trump, but then that also doesn't make sense because of how obviously you can see them working together and they're not pointing these things out. The partisan narratives usually end up this way, and it's always taking advantage of a moment where there isn't a complete story, right? Where the honest person would say, well, we don't know, and we leave it there. That's where these grifters lurch into the conversation and fill in the blanks with what they want every time. And sometimes they guess right, but the reality is that this is how we see it. And the mainstream alternative media is the corporate media.
That capability exists. It's possible some of those drones are here. So I have two questions. How are they fueling them? They have to land somewhere. Drones don't fly forever. Why don't they close down the airspace? Yes, it's inconvenient. Yes, it's the holidays. Shut it down. But if you start shooting things,
that's an interesting statement,
and you don't know how they're fueled, that's going to be mass explosions. This isn't like one spy balloon. Congressman, this is serious.
See my point? It's like, Assad gas attack and Chinese spy balloons and Iran nuclear weapons and just all these dumb things that we can literally show that their own sources tell you isn't true. But, who cares about the truth, right? It's all about the narrative today.
We've got to bring them down, and we've got to find a way to bring them down. I don't know exactly where they're landing. Obviously, I have some information. And again, this isn't just Jeff Van Drew. Oh, let's get on Harris Faulkner's show and say something outrageous. I'm telling.
Well, that's usually a good indication that he's being dishonest, right? I'm not lying, I swear. And it's not just me lying over here. It's totally true. Trust me. Not a good sign.
The straight deal from very high positioned individuals who are telling me this. And the bottom line is they're launching them. They are across the country. We don't even have anything like this. No. Our government and also certainly our hobbyists.
Anything like what? Something you have yet to verify? Something you're both guessing at blindly because someone told you something? It's irresponsible is what it is.
No, so think about it. It's not only do I have the information, but it's also common sense. We've got to get them down. We've got to determine how they function, what they do, make sure that we can get them, and you're right, in a safe way. When I say shoot them down, get them down any way that you can, but right now they're probably extracting information. This is a clear and present danger.
Right, did you get that? But totally in a safe way, but shoot them down any way you can. So do anything you can to get them down, but totally in a safe way. It's almost like they are trying to create chaos, which, by the way, is usually how this works.
To the United States and to our president-elect, and it's a serious business.
All right. So, of course, it's all about going after Donald Trump, and it's all about the bad guys and who benefits from all of that. It's pretty easy to see. So, as Doug and Stacey point out, when you finally realize it, it will be too late. And this is where I grabbed that image from today. Thank you, Doug and Stacey. Now, the point is that this game, the game they just went to, the Navy game, the point is you could see them all in the thing and funded by Palantir, or at least they have ads there. And the point is not to say that that's some big bombshell. The point is just to connect the dots on where this is all going. And the point that Doug here is making is simply that there is something else to this, not even whether it's about the drone or not. The larger picture, as you can see, Elon, Vance, and Trump in this picture, and Mike as well. The point is that they're all, guys, this is not outsider. These are not outsiders. Arguably, you could say that these are the deep state, especially people like Elon Musk. But either way, the unelected power structure, but now you're about to see something. Well, even then, he's not elected. He got picked. But the point is about the overlap of the technocratic direction, the Palantir overlap with Israel, the Palantir overlap with the drone conversation, and just the bigger idea of where this all goes. If you believe the outsiders fire the deep state, you're going to roll out some new American freedom timeframe. These people are literally laying the groundwork for exactly the opposite of that. On the surface, but they just call it something else, which is usually how this works. And let's not forget, and you can prove how closely tied Palantir, specifically Thiel and Karp, by the way, even though the point is Karp was on the side of Kamala Harris, endorsing, and then Thiel was on the other side with Trump. Point is, that it didn't really matter what you pretended you were picking if that even actually translates. It ultimately ended up supporting the agenda, Israel and Palantir. And that's plus more than that, obviously, but in the context of this conversation, this is Bloomberg, Thiel's Palantir, strategic partnership with Israel in January 2024, well into the genocide. Happy. And clearly, this guy was like, well, I don't want my face being seen. Interesting. Or that's some kind of top secret gang, whatever. The point is they're happy to work alongside Israel to use your AI technology to kill children, which we'll get to in a minute. I'll give you lavender, at least from this article. Make sure you read that. The information showing you that that's what they're doing. And the clip we play with Teal, where he's just mumbling through answering why that's okay. It's obvious they know what they're doing. So to me, I mean, if you're willing to ignore a genocide for your profit, you're a monster, an absolute monster. And here is the clip that was played at that game. And guess what? It's a Palantir advertisement. Can you imagine what it shows? That's Palantir. I just think that's absurd. Like the timing of all of this. And as Truth Seeker points out, Palantir aired this commercial during an Army-Navy game showing drones being released from a ship. Further proof it's all a psyop. And I wouldn't say proof, not even remotely, but I just find that very revealing. When they have a very clear interest in controlling the market, in controlling the infrastructure of our drone surveillance, of restricting, like controlling the airspace in that context as it pertains to drones through legislation, working with foreign governments to use these, I mean, countless ways. Now, I even added elements of this. Well, I'll get to it in a second, in regard to like where I think this may be going. But here, Darren at Plymouth says the reason all these drones have lights on is because they want to be seen. Is the point we made earlier. This suggests that they are not a foreign adversary, which leaves only two options. They're not of this world, or they belong to our government or groups they're working with. It is likely the latter. And it says we're all being played. It's just one of these images you can see of these, whatever they're claiming this is. And now, to be clear, by the way, a lot of these things have already been broken down as not what they appear to be. Now, Douglas McGregor, which I'm not sure where I think I stand on him. I mean, he makes I'll show him a statement for him later in the show from Syria, but he says, breaking as of yesterday, drones are now reported over the U.S. Capitol. Which he could just be highlighting that for you. But at the same time, I'm very cautious about who seems to be driving this narrative and why. But the U.S. Capitol now. And this person says, what do you think of this? And shows you these same images that just keep popping back up from that same account with the same narrative. And this person highlights this, saying they're doing this as an attempt to stop Donald Trump, says Modern Warfare with Alex Jones. I wonder where he got that from. And it says, COVID failed to stop Trump. Assassination attempts failed to stop Trump. Now they're going with aliens. Okay, but see, that's deviating from the, it's all over the place. So now they're doing this so they can steal power from Trump with continuity of government. Now that was what Alex was reporting a few days ago, even though now it's completely shifted. Even though when that was happening, it was completely, we know for sure. My secret sources tell me we know for sure. Continuity of government is a principle that ensures, well, that we've already gone over that. The reality of, I just read it, a principle that ensures that government can continue its essential operations in the event of a catastrophic event. And it's a way that it is created essentially a parallel government in this country. Alex says, this is 100% the desperate deep state system getting ready to pull some serious SHIT to stop Trump. And then it turns out that it's not real. This video is not related to the recent unmanned aerial vehicles reported in New Jersey. This video shows drones part of a Blizzard holiday party at Knott's Berry Farm, a holiday light show at a family amusement park. Oops. But who cares? We'll just rush forward and jump to the next one, okay? That's how this works for the mainstream alternative media. Here is Daily Mail. Ex-CIA officer gives chilling drone theory as terrified residents sound the alarm as crisis spreads. 3 different ways they push that in the headline. And it says, Baldwin said, now in turn, and this is the former, in quotes, CIA. Now in terms of who is behind this, seeing the statements that have been made by John Kerry, who has said that these objects are not operating illegally, which is a very interesting statement. Well, it would be about the lights, obviously. And it says, coupled with the several op-eds that have been out there in the last 24 hours about the need to look at our detection systems, very real, makes me think perhaps this is actually a classified exercise to test either evasion technology or detection technology in urban areas. So I honestly, when coming from an ex-CIA for the Daily Mail, probably what they want you to hear. But either way, the point would be, even if it's just giving you her thoughts, one obviously should be whether like this is about getting a reaction to justify a next step. But however you want to read that, the point is about some kind of classified operation, right? Well, as Jason points out, think mystery drones are sketchy. Wait until you hear about Project Starshield and how Elon Musk has partnered with U.S. military and intelligence agencies to create a massive surveillance network of low-orbit satellites that are capable of rapidly locating targets almost anywhere on Earth. There's 1,000 ways that overlaps with being able to detect these things from satellites. Maybe that's being tested in real time. Either way, this is the article that Derek wrote, which is what he was referencing. The quote from the National Reconnaissance Organization is, "You can't hide," is what he said. That's literally the clip. And in fact, I should even play that. It's right here. You know what? I probably have to. Yeah, it's okay. That's all it really says. They get into it, and he says, from last June, December of this year, we'll have probably launched 100 satellites. So we are going from the demo phase to the operational phase. So it's funny how now that they're in the, quote, operational phase is when we start seeing these things rolled out, when they just had exercises back in September. And it says where we're really going to be able to start testing all of this stuff out in a more operational way. Right. One of that could be to release drones to be able to test your satellite infrastructure, whether they can detect and surveil everything. Just theorizing, just an opinion. And it says what we are going to be doing, they are part of the proliferated architecture to go off it and get us reasonably high resolution imagery of the Earth and high rate speed, he says. Now you can't hide because you're constantly being looked at. That's Elon Musk. And the height of the U.S. intelligence apparatus surveillance network. The NRO provides surveillance even for the NSA. Elon Musk is currently working with SpaceX to create what you're looking at right there. And essentially a all-connected surveillance grid around the planet with satellites. Elon Musk and SpaceX are helping U.S. intelligence to build the world's largest spy satellite network. Kind of think that's related to this. Now, on the UFO part of it, you saw a lot of this get floated, as I said before. I mean, aside from the open, objective possibility of anything, I tend to think it's interesting how this always pops up in the conversation. And I think there's a very clear agenda around this, which is why Blue Beam was one of the things that was, should have been considered to start, was forcefully stated as the fact for some and it started. The point is it's an idea of a psychological operation of projecting something. And the context should be, and by the way, it's a very real thing. It's a very real project, and it's not something that should be dismissed. And the argument is around something either projecting a UFO invasion or even the second coming of Christ, right? So that would be the idea of, imagine how people would respond if you put something that is very realistic in the sky that looked like a bunch of alien invasion happening. People would actually, many of us would be skeptical, I think, but most people would probably fall for it because it's very hard to deny what you're looking at, right? And so the point about that is whether that might have been something that this was, which to me, it very, very early began to demonstrate that there was real examples of something. So that was very quick for me to be like, that seems unlikely, but don't disregard the possibility. This person says, this is possibly the best and clearest video ever of these drones approaching a UAP. And then as it touches the UAP shoots it down. Now, again, the UAP was like a UFO reference, unidentified flying. No, that's the UFO. I think it's the same kind of point. I'll make sure I just have the right acronym. It is unidentified aerial phenomena. Yeah, so it's meant to be more indicative of something outside, not terrestrial, right? That's what I think that's what she's saying. And that's what she's highlighting is it's all about, aliens, the kind of thing. And so what she's saying is this is an example of a drone going up against what is something different. So in her conversation, there's drones like we're all talking about, and there's a whole other element to it. Certainly possible. The point here is that she's highlighting this interesting video where you see one of these fly up to it right there. You can see a little tiny dot right there. Wait, you see it. And then it flies over to it and gets shot down or something. There it is. Now, again, even that would be an assumption, right? It very well could be that they're still in this close proximity, and that was something that it dropped. But I would agree, it's interesting. Like they seem to be getting close and something happened. Like it's very possible. Just even putting aside the possibility of some alien entity, that this is something that is alien to the concept. Like this is a foreign entity from the world that the U.S. is engaging with. And for whatever reason, they don't want you to see that or know that's what's going on. There's all sort of possibilities. And it is very dangerous for them to continue to allow this to be like, that's one of the biggest points for me, is usually what you get is a blackout and then people like us trying to show you what you're not seeing and then just ignoring and denying it, right? In this case, you get the over focus. You get the hype from everybody, especially the corporate mainstream alternative media, and then them pointing to it and giving you these weird middle ground, like not answers. To me, there's just no way that lines up with them hoping you don't look at it. That is them pretending don't look at it when they know you'll want to look at it. You see, and again, today, that seems to be an easy way to trick people. So I'll include an article from Matt Ehret, which, by the way, tomorrow I have a great article series. I'm going to start with part 1 that he put out about about the UFO Psyop discussion. This one was from September 5th, 2023. H.G. Wells predicted programming revolution, UFOs, drug, and the Great Reset. Check it out. It's a very interesting article. I'll also include an interview I had with Garland Nixon back on February 13th, 2023. False flags, psyops, and UFOs. Oh my. Now, here's an interesting overlap to this. And this comes from more of the alien kind of adjacent conversation. Truth Poll says this is something I would say is close to biblical Ezekiel's wheel. Within a wheel within a wheel rotating on its axis, full of eyes, optics like lights. This ain't no drone. Now, again, if that's even real, which is a big if, it does look very strange. But I've seen little things you can buy at Walmart that look just like that at night. Now, maybe that looks like a bigger thing, but it's not, or maybe he doesn't realize that it's smaller than he thinks it is. You know, the perspective, especially at night, is difficult. I'm just trying to throw out all certain sorts of possibilities. My point is, you all have seen these things, these little balls you can buy that float. I mean, there's pop-up ads for it on Twitter. So it's certainly possible that this could be something not like that crazy. But what I find interesting is this religious connection. Now, who right now is really pushing this whole prophetic, religious, end times conversation? Worth pointing out. So he's highlighting this. And what's funny is he says that, and then down here it says, this was allegedly taken over New Mexico. It's like, well, maybe put that in the original tweet. But you know why you don't? Because you want more reach. But this one, Will Donahue points at something completely different, making the same point, which tells me something. I'm not saying this is, Ophanim, but it sure as SHIT moves and looks like the description in Ezekiel, which is the same reference. So very interesting. But to me, that looks very fake, to be honest. But either way, the point is you're getting this, and you'll find this. Just search for Ezekiel. You're going to find a lot of people pointing that out. Doesn't have to mean anything, but it's another data point that seems to align with where I feel this seems to be coming from. Now, Alexandros Marinos makes a good point, rather citing somebody else. Best explanation for the drone chaos I've seen yet. He says, what we need to focus on during this, who is receiving a pardon? We already know that. Who is getting immunity? What bills are being quietly amended and passed by Congress as we look into the skies? Now, it doesn't even mean that that's exactly what he listed, but the point is, as we focus on this clear cat toy distraction story, even if real, something else is happening, as always. Now, to be clear, when I say that, even though I say that is possibly real, even real things can be used to just, over-focus your attention, like the balloon story. There were clearly balloons in the sky, and everybody got super worked up, and everyone's focusing and theorizing, and meanwhile, at the time we highlighted, there was a bunch of stuff going on that the partisan conversation was completely oblivious to. Now, one of the points, as he highlights, is about legislation passing. Well, I figured it was relevant as a good segue into the conversation of Israel to highlight one of the major things that just happened. Or rather, that happened in the House that's about to potentially, I argue, very clearly going to pass the Senate, at least in the context of funding for Israel. They may nitpick about other things that they, support for one thing or the other, but what will never seem to be debated is the ongoing growing funding for Israel at your expense. So what this is a post from AIPAC that was deleted, even though they did leave it up on Instagram and Facebook. On Twitter, they did delete it. And here's you can see that this week, the House passed the bill. It's not there. And here's the actual post. This week, the House passed a bill with major U.S.-Israel provisions. Overall, the bill includes more than $627 million in authorizations for critical U.S.-Israel programs. So it passed the House. And probably right now, while we're all pointing to the sky, it's probably going to fly by the Senate. Or the drone legislation that will restrict your rights, your ability to do that, or increase your surveillance, as we're all pointing at things we can't explain and listen to senators scream about things we can't talk, things we can't prove. Seems pretty interesting, right? So here's this clip again. I know I just saw it yesterday, but it's worth watching because the point is over $500 million just to arm Israel as they commit genocide. Is that something Americans want? Pretty sure that's not America first. You realize how much $500 million can help people in this country? Now, maybe you could argue it's something going around the world that helps people that need it more, but that's not Israel. That is not arming their actions against foreign countries at your expense. That's not what that means. I argue that most conservatives would be very upset about that if they were being confronted with this story, which it seems that most of them aren't talking about. The reality of spending that much money to dump weapons in the hands of Israel and help them develop more weapons to continue using against children in Gaza. Mark my words, that's part of this. Whether that's connected to the story or not, this legislation is a big deal. And it always is, but right now more than ever because of what we can see happening. And that across the board, your government seems to be in unison supporting the ongoing discussion, or rather the ongoing funding of a genocide. And as usual, AIPAC just can't help but brag about how much they can control your government.
With the Middle East rapidly changing and Israel fighting on multiple fronts, Congress is taking important action to advance policies that will help keep our ally safe. This week, the House passed the National Defense Authorization Act, the major annual defense bill that authorizes the Pentagon's budget. AIPAC worked throughout the year to ensure vital U.S.-Israel defense programs were included in the bill. And I'm proud to report that all of our key priorities are in this legislation. The bill authorizes $500 million for missile defense programs like Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow, which have saved countless lives this year by intercepting thousands of rockets over Israel's skies. It increased authorizations to $80 million for technologies to detect and destroy terror tunnels, and over $47 million for the United States and Israel to cooperate on emerging threats. This bill also authorizes numerous other programs that will help keep Americans and Israelis safer, like joint military exercises, cooperation on space and satellite security, efforts to counter Iranian-backed terrorist groups, and increase partnerships with other Middle East allies. Now that it's passed the House, the Senate will take up the bill, where we expect a vote in the coming days, after which it will be sent to the president's desk to be signed into law. America's support for Israel's security is as important as ever. And with your help, Congress is delivering results that will save lives and ensure Israel has the resources it needs to protect its families. Thank you.
Well, Iranian-backed proxies, well, I'm pretty sure, even, again, what they claim those are not actually what those are. These are simply elements that are allied with Iran, but pretty sure that it's not Hezbollah that's occupying, committing genocide in multiple countries. I'm pretty sure it's not Hamas, even though you fund them as well, that is committing genocide in multiple countries, who are breaking the law around the world, whose leader is about to go to prison for 4 different indictments. Like, I'm pretty sure that's not the reality of the Houthis, for example, who are one of the few groups out there that are actively fighting against what's going on. But that's who they're pointing at. And that's what they're telling you. You just funded with your tax dollars Israel's efforts to keep murdering these people while they commit genocide around the world. That's pretty upsetting. So ask yourself whether that might be part of what is being rolled out as we're all distracted. Now, talking about Israel in general, specifically around Gaza, or actually this first point, it's Lebanon, I want to make sure we don't lose sight of what's going on in the world. Dan Cohen highlights 3 days after October 7th, an Israeli who was involved with the Gilad Shalit negotiations stated that, quote, the state of Israel has implemented the Hannibal Directive on the whole of the Gaza Strip. Now, Dan has done amazing work on this conversation Many of us using work like his and electronic intifada and people like Max Blumenthal have very clearly broken down the unquestionable reality that they not only chose to kill their own people for a lot of reasons you could get into, but the point is that they did so, and that they clearly ordered the Hannibal Directive. Not just that they did what ended up resembling that, but officially ordered the Hannibal Directive. If you don't remember what that means, it means that they are willing to kill their own people so they can't be used against them. It's very real, very documented, and even the Israeli media. In fact, it was Haaretz and others that actually broke that story. Well, beyond the undeniable reality that we were all pointing to it, they came out and broke the story that it was provably ordered from the higher brass. So the point is that we know that's reality. Now, he goes on to say it's not a secret, even in Israel, that the captives are targets. Here is what is being reported. Al-Qasim brigades in Lebanon announced that Israel bombed a building where they had intel on their hostages being kept. After the first bombing, they returned to bomb again, ensuring that their hostages would be killed. Literally, they're murdering their own people because at this point, they're a political liability. And that's been shown clearly. They go on to say, since they tend to come out knowing too much about their own government and military, as well as discovering the humanity of the people they've been told all their lives were out to kill them. It's the truth. And it's not my opinion. You can look at all the different examples of pretty much every single hostage, save for the ones that weirdly a few months after being out, suddenly start telling you another story that to a T. 95% of them have held their story that they were treated well, and to be clear, all of them come out saying that. A few of them have weirdly completely changed their stories. I mean, like diametrically opposite story. But my point was that most of them are still telling they treated me kindly, they didn't hurt me. The point is that it was the opposite of what we were told. Now, it's very clear to see what's going on in Israeli actual torture prisons. Like, that's not a hyperbolic statement. We can prove that they're raping and torturing, according to every international body you can point to at this point. But realizing that they are choosing to target where these people are held. Now, actually, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about this, I feel like I assumed this was in Lebanon. Oh, you know what? Okay, how did I make that mistake? So I guess what I was thinking, I made a mistake in this case. I thought this was referencing the groups in Lebanon. I was wrong. I'm trying to remember what the group was. Anyway, the point is the mistake. So here, this is in Gaza. So it even makes it better because what we're going to get into is the rest on Gaza. Either way, the point is we know this is happening in all of these locations, but the reason this made sense to me is we're talking about hostages, right? And so that's clearly happening in Gaza. Nonetheless, the point is the same. They're telling you, as we've proven many times, as hostages who have come out of Gaza have told us, they watched people get killed by IDF bombs. The Bibas father, which they still continue to use the children's names, knowing that they killed them, has said on air that they watched them get killed by IDF bombs. And to this very day, the Israeli government keeps using the names and pictures of those children, even though they know what happened because it was very publicized and they keep denying it. As Craig Murray points out, the rate at which Israel is killing in Gaza has not slowed. And incredibly, the proportion killed who are children has actually increased from 42% overall to 48% last month. Whatever you want to make of that, the reality is Israel is only getting more emboldened. And I think there's clear indications to take from that, but all these things are very contentious today. The reality is that whatever it is, Israel is continuing to go harder at all of the things we can see are illegal that reveal what they really are. And that's a scary thing to think about. Here, Sarah Abdallah points out a very heartbreaking story. I mean, I got to be clear. If this isn't necessarily graphic, but this is a heart-wrenching image that you're going to see. So if you don't want to see this, if you're in a moment where you don't want to potentially be upset, maybe you shouldn't watch this. It's very quick. 6-year-old child lost both of his legs by Israeli bombs. Here he is today in Gaza, as she writes, home to the largest number of amputee children in modern history. This is what the Western regime calls self-defense.
سعيد.
محمد سعيد. قديش عمرك؟ 6 سنين. لا حول الله يحفظك يا رب. عارفين يا اخواني انه هذا الطفل انا اول مره اشوفه صدفه مارق بين الخيام لمحته، اول ما شفته مباشره شغلت الكاميرا وقعدت اصور. مصدوم مش عارف احكي. هو في ناس هيك؟ يا الله كيف. الله يعوضه يا رب في الدنيا قبل الاخره يا رب، هو واهله يا رب. الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله على كل النعم اللي احنا فيها ومش حاسين فيها ومش مدركين لحتى الان انه احنا احسن من غيرنا وانه احنا في نعمه كبيره، نعم عظيمه جدا، وانه احنا لازم نشكر ربنا كل يوم، نحمد الله كل يوم على النعم اللي احنا فيها. الحمد لله يا اخوان الحمد لله. ايقنت انه الدنيا هذه ثانيه ومش مستاهله نهائي.
Now, for the podcast, I just didn't want to read off, just what 2 points. What's interesting, first of all, is that all he's saying is, how, which I always find interesting from in any position of faith in the world, it's very stands out to me how much from whether Palestinian or what, just a Muslim faith position, but I think largely I see it mostly in Palestinians. This, like, imagine being in the midst of something like that. Not even just a child, just the world, your entire civilization, it's dirt, it's gone. And your statements are God is great. And it's like, it shows you that this very powerful belief in the fact that there's something bigger than us. As he says, praise, he says and that we should thank God every day and praise God every day. And the blessings we have. He's saying this because the point is, he's saying this is horrifying. Look at what they're doing to these children. Look at the reality we're living in. But then my point is, then he ends with this state, which is very common for Palestinians to say that. And I think that's inspiring. Because I can't even imagine trying to, be thankful for what you have in the middle of such horror. But good on him for doing so. The second point is, without hearing the words, I find it kind of disgusting that what he's saying, such beautiful things, that people in this country would hear that and think terrorism. That is a testament to the propaganda that comes from your government, both sides of it. And this is what they're creating. Matt Gaetz says, it's so sad what's happened to Ireland. Now, this is not the point. This is what I wrote afterward, but he goes, let it be a lesson. Unchecked immigration ruins nations, which, of course, it's incredible to say that about even ask Claire and others from Ireland what's causing that. It's the same point. They argue it's somehow the point is that this is a manufactured problem that the U.S. and Israel and the rest are very clearly a part of. Either way, it says Israel will close its embassy in Ireland due to extreme anti-Israel policies. You mean holding you accountable for your genocide? What a racist. It's crazy. And that's what he's saying is somehow unchecked immigration has caused them to what? Hate Israel? Like, you guys are so lost. That's the best he can do, is suggest that somehow because Muslims have invaded Ireland that now they hate Israel. Like, you guys are gross in every possible way. You are the worst things I can see in this conversation today. And what's interesting is that what Ireland has been doing is having a very clear stance to push back against the complete impunity that they're giving Israel. But Matt Gaetz is completely a part of that. But I simply said, maybe it's because, as this Jewish doctor points out from his time in Gaza, that the IDF is targeting almost exclusively children. And then what do you know? They put the graphic warning on like they do literally every time. And I followed up by saying, will you put a graphic warning on this image, Twitter, of a child in Gaza shot in the head by the IDF? Or just the video above that's not graphic at all, where a Jewish doctor simply describes how the IDF is killing almost exclusively children? Oh, but you don't. Funny how that works, how you can have something that is at least somewhat more graphic, but nothing weird there, but you can have a doctor outlining things in just plain terms, nothing graphic that would be, you get the point. I make it every time. I think it's very obvious how this video in particular is problematic for people controlling this conversation, because he's a Jewish doctor and he makes this profoundly clear. And I've played it many times. I'll play it again because we're going to talk about what's going on in Gaza right now, specifically about children, while Matt Gaetz wants to deflect and act like somehow you're the problem by calling out a genocide.
When were you in Gaza?
End of April for the first couple weeks. And then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head in the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper. And they're dead center shots.
In fact, more than 20 doctors recently in Gaza also told Sunday morning about gunshot wounds to children. One American doctor told us he even reviewed CT scans to confirm what he saw because he, quote, didn't believe that this many children could be admitted to a single hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. Some shootings have been captured on video.
So, of all the disaster zones you've seen, how does Gaza compare?
All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
Almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before. Never seen that. I've seen more incinerated children than I've ever seen in my entire life combined. I've seen more shredded children in just the first week.
Shredded?
Shredded.
What do you mean?
Missing body parts, being crushed by buildings, the greatest majority, or bomb explosions, the next greatest majority. We've taken shrapnel as big as my thumb out of 8-year-olds.
The UN reports that to date, more than 80% of Gaza's population has been displaced, and the majority.
Now here is the example again. This is being shared by Mohammed Safa. A 1-month-old baby who was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper in Gaza has survived, thank God. I see no one sharing. If he were dead, everyone would share. Sad. The point is, guys, this is everywhere you look. And of course, they're trying to suppress that. And I'll include the thread, by the way, of all these many, many doctors. Weirdly enough, by the way, none of which below seem to have graphic warning labels, despite being far more graphic and plenty of examples. But just same point as always. There's very obvious censorship on this platform. Forgot to save that one for you. Now, next is the same conversation. Here is The Guardian. Now, this is from December 11th of this year. Death feels imminent for 96% of children in Gaza. 96%. Death feels imminent for 96% of them. And realize that the vast majority, well over 70% of what has been focused on, have been children and women and children. Tiberius says, F Israel and F the United States, sitting behind computer screens, targeting 1 million children with the world's most advanced weaponry like absolute cowards. Dan Cohen highlights another thing for another coverage of this story. Mossab Abu Tawar, breaking news. 6 people got killed in an airstrike in an apartment complex in Gaza City. These 2 are kids. This is from the 11th. He says this is the 433rd consecutive day of watching Israel exterminate Palestinian children. If we stop talking about the genocide, that means Israel has won the information war. The resistance hasn't given up, and we shouldn't either. Tiberius again highlights a graphic. This is from Gaza-based NGO supported by the World Child Alliance. Gaza, genocide, psychological impact on children in Gaza. 96% fear imminent death. 92% not accepting of reality. 79% suffer from nightmares. 73% display aggressive behavior. These children will never be the same as they might have been before this. There's no way around that. They're psychologically broken. You go through something like this as a child that can't process what you're looking at, guys, this is what happens. It's abuse at the most obvious form. I mean, really, at the lowest level of what we're talking about, but it's definitely abuse on top of everything else. He says, what the West has done to the children in Gaza cannot be denied, overlooked, forgotten, or resigned to the history books. There must be consequences. There must be justice. Oh, and let's not forget, here's a child who also has an American passport. So I think it's very, very interesting why people like Stefanik, or Tom Cotton, or Brian Mast, or plenty of others continue to harp about the only specifically Israeli Americans that we should care about, they claim are still being held hostage, who have probably been killed by Israel by now. The problem is that this is also, I shouldn't say problem, but the important point is this is also a Palestinian American. Whereas, not that it should matter anymore, there are simply just Americans, as NPR reported, and plenty of others, over 600 of them trapped in Gaza when this started. I just think it's important to continually reiterate that your Congress people do not care about Americans, but go out of their way to fight for an Israeli as soon as they're even proposed to be a threat. Ryan Rosbiani says, never forget this. Biden funded an Israeli bomb to the home of an American child. He's holding up his passport. And this was a very widely covered story at the time. I covered this myself. Robert in Lakesh points out, and he's working on an article for TLAV right now, in the last 2 months, Israel has killed at least 4,000 civilians in northern Gaza alone. The real toll is much higher. Bodies are left in the unreachable streets, and many are missing under rubble. Israel pulverized what was left of the buildings there too. The media ignored this. Now here's Elise Stefanik. This is from yesterday. 434. She writes, it has been 434 days, she says, since Hamas terrorists abducted innocent civilians during the barbaric October 7th attack in Israel. There are 100 still being held hostage in Gaza, including 7 Americans. See my point? What about the 600 that are Palestinian Americans? What about the many that are just American, Stefanik? Funny how as an American in quotes, an American representative in quotes, you only seem to care about ones with an Israeli part in their name. Why is that? It's obvious. I've never once seen her acknowledge, or any of them for that matter, the Americans that are being hurt in Gaza. And right in the beginning, there were 3 stories of American families or American individuals who were there with their family, who were from the United States, who were saying, I feel like I've been abandoned. No one's helping my family. Nobody cared, guys, because they were so terrified of highlighting what was going on. And now they're screeching about people that were IDF members who were taken because they were murdering people as well or occupying illegal territory. And those are the ones she cares about. Why? Because somebody's paying her to. And then APAC Tracker writes, day 32. It's been 32 days since Stefanik has posted about anything but Israel. That's a weird way to write that. The point is that she's posted only about Israel. And watch it. He scrolls through it all. Think about that for a second. You have an American politician who for 32 days straight has only posted about Israel. Speaks for itself. And she's made almost $1 million because of it. And here's somebody else responding to the same point. And he says, day 340 or 434. 434 days since the genocide in Gaza began. Over 44,000 lives lost, including Americans, which she doesn't want to acknowledge. More than 10,000 bodies still buried beneath the rubble. Over 106,000 wounded, 70% of the women and children. Over 10,000 Palestinians held as hostage, their suffering ignored. This violence must end. This genocide must stop now. All hostages must be freed. Justice is long overdue. ICJ and ICC, it's time to act. Shame on those who will turn a blind eye, like Stefanik. This is a stain on the soul of humanity, a wound that will never heal. And this is the kind of thing that is staining the soul of humanity, guys. These are not good people. They know what they're doing. They're happily ignoring, almost gleefully in some cases, what was happening. When they get confronted in the halls of Congress, they laugh and shout and shout. It's disgusting. They know what they're doing. Now here is what Stefanik is ignoring. Palestinians record their own genocide while Western leaders deny that it's even happening. They tell you not to believe your own eyes, to believe the state of burning people alive. Yeah, 30 or 400, so many, whatever, how many days you meant. The point is that what you're staring at, there's no Hamas tunnels, there's no human shields. But guess what? They're not even saying that anymore. They're just going, okay, you guys are focused over there. Who cares about narratives then? If you're not even asking what justifies the murder of all these innocent people, then I'm just going to pretend it didn't happen, which is what they've been doing for their entire existence. So think about that as we're watching them just continue to bomb and kill 4,000 civilians within 48 hours in Gaza, and no one's even bringing it up outside of independent media. There's not even an excuse. There's not even a narrative around it anymore. Well, as Scott Horton points out, conservative American Zionists, just imagine that this little girl, bloody-faced, being carried away from an Israeli bomb, just to imagine that she's someone's pet squirrel. You'd be mad as hell at Joe Biden then, wouldn't you? Now, there's a fair point to be made about why the story mattered, obviously. But he makes an excellent point. Like with the drone story. Let's have some balance here. Let's recognize what matters and what's going on. We can prove what is important. Now, the story around what happened with the squirrel, there was an important story to make there about freedom, about about the actions of a government. But the bottom line is the absolute lack of concern by a lot of them for what is being done to these people in your name, in your tax dollars, which is clearly supported by the incoming administration. Decentered News points out, and this Eunice Tarawi doing an amazing job continuing to document all of these war crimes. 14 months ago, it says, we've made very clear that we expect Israel, the State Department says this, to conduct its operations in compliance with international law, protect civilians from harm. We'll continue to work with them to ensure that they meet the highest standards. Well, here is Israel today. They shared this, by the way, on their own social media, and guess what it says? Gaza, wake up, Jablia. Yeah, clearly all about freedom and democracy, right? Like, realize that's Jabalia refugee camp. We're talking about the area where there are a lot of people that they routinely bomb. His point is he's opening fire into an open area where there are civilians. Now, whether he hit him or not, you can't tell in the video. The point is that it's a crime regardless, that he is belligerently firing on an open area full of civilians. That's why he posted it laughingly saying, wake up, Jabalia. They know that they're going to get away with this right now. I hope they're wrong, but sadly, it does continue to seem like they might be right. That we just cannot seem to highlight the fact, or rather force our power structures to give a damn about what they're doing, which I don't know why is not earth-shattering to anybody with a brain. But I do know why people, even with brains, would decide to ignore that for their own personal interest. Germany and the United States supply 99% of the weapons exported to Israel. This is from the UN Special Rapporteur, Ben Saul. He says they could stop this conflict overnight if they stop the weapons that kill the Palestinians. And we've been pointing this out from day one. And so you have to acknowledge that this is a U.S. and German and Israeli genocide. They have equal part in what has continued to happen, especially since we've now proven that they have people on the ground. Ryan Razbiani makes this even more clear. One image makes this very clear. He says Jabalia was once home to 170,000 residents. Now it is devastated. Now realize the camp we're talking about is still like the tent makeup. There is still a camp where people are trying to survive. What he's talking about is the central place called Jabalia. Here's what it looked like before this. Here's what it looks like right now. Now, if you can't connect those dots, if you can't have the courage to highlight that there's no possible legal way that is going after tunnels and bad guys and Hamas and human shields, then you just don't want to see the truth, which fine. Then why are you even here? The reality is obvious. This is ethnic cleansing. This is complete destruction of an entire civilization. And you know what? They're telling you why. They were telling you why day one. They've been telling you why for decades. But just have to listen. Alan Mizrahi points out that they're continuing, even to this moment, to displace people inside of Gaza, despite the fact that they've already been, let's be clear about this. They have displaced every location in Gaza. They have been playing a game where they move them from corner to corner to corner and bomb them in every location simultaneously, the place they're currently at, the place they're told to go to be safe, and on the way. Every time we've proven this. Corporate media has pointed to this many times. The reality is that why now are they doing it again? They've displaced these people into controlled areas that they then move them again and move them again and move them again. And every single time they're torturing these people. They're making, in some cases, it's multiple times a day. Now here is the same point. Internationally recognized war criminals issuing evacuation orders to the remaining survivors of their genocide. The most documented series of state-organized atrocities in human history. This is what we get from Western culture. He says the Cradle reports the Israeli military issues a new evacuation order for Gaza right now, threatening to bomb parts of the area that the army has already designated as a humanitarian safe zone. But regardless of the confusing nature of this, which does give them the justification, like basically they'll give conflicting reports over certain days, blaming it on them, essentially. But even then, even if they only gave one order, we've already proven that they deliberately bomb the place they told them to go to, or bomb before they said the time that they would let, like, you have 2 hours and they bomb in 15 minutes. Every single time. But the larger simple point here is that they've already gone over all these areas. This is torture. They are torturing these people, and you can see them laughing and shooting and opening and posting their TikToks and talking about settlements. These are not people at war. These are people who are sadistically torturing an entire population. As from December 11th, 2023, their media told you. Quote, the commanders say it clearly. Anyone who walks on 2 legs and is not a soldier dies. Period. That's from a year ago. The Israeli genocide forces have been creating what they call annihilation zones. Very publicized. This has been openly admitted on their TV, on their channel for 14 months. But yet, for some reason, and again, the real point needs to be made, your government sees this. They know it's happening. They don't care. They're deliberately pretending like they don't see it or acting like you're wrong, despite them openly saying it. It's like Netanyahu and Galan openly telling you these things. They just go, you're racist, or you're wrong. That's fake news. Now, I call that desperation, but weirdly, it continues to seem like nothing's changing. Now, I do think there's a level of desperation because they haven't been at the point where it seems that everyone's able to see it. But I think they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. If it never does, this won't stop. They know you see them. And what they're doing in the midst of all of that is starving everybody as well. None of these problems have gone away. No, people are just less and less covering it. Famine is spreading in Gaza. Gaza doesn't have enough food for the children while the world full of food is watching and doing nothing. Now, I want to be very clear about this. This has only gotten dramatically worse, and less people are talking about it. Remember we were talking about it right here, where this was where we were at? And I was saying, oh my God, look at it. It's only 165. It's only 165 trucks a day. What we're looking at for the podcast is the UN breakdown of the trucks coming in and out. And the reality is, before this started, as you guys know, 500 a day, including fuel, was the average, and they were already borderline food insecure. Or rather, they were food insecure, but borderline getting into a worse situation. That was widely reported at the time. The moment this started, Israel shut this down to basically zero for weeks, guaranteeing a rapid surge into famine and starvation. And then it went up a little bit, and at a peak, only ever got to 165 a day. Down from the average 500, and they were already food insecure. Now, the reason that this is even necessary is because Israel's never allowed these people to go back to their homes, which was agreed upon a long time ago. So for the argument of why they even need to behave, that's because of Israel. Now, what has continued has been shocking. With more crossings open, mind you. They've opened more crossings, which gives the illusion of more, but they've restricted it even further. To this point, all of November, 65 a day. That's it. Now, what I know for a fact is happening based on every report, based on having desperate famine situations months ago, every day right now, people are dying and no one's reporting it. Well, largely because there's very little ability to report from within Gaza because they're executing reporters every day, which has happened again. Every day I see a new reporter they've murdered. That people are just dropping dead and there's no one to report this stuff. People are starving in real time. Well, and of course, that's what they're assuming they're not bombed or raped or tortured while they're there. But you just can't ignore this stuff, guys. It's shocking. Under food insecurity, it says famine thresholds may have already been crossed or else will be in the near future. You know why it says that? Because no one's allowed to look at this stuff. Israel has this blocked out. Nobody's allowed to look. There's only times we've seen corporate media go in to look is when they're allowed to in certain weird circumstances. And even then, they got called out for certain things, which is probably why they're desperately trying to stop it now. They're in famine, guys. 91% of the analyzed population is projected to face high levels of acute food insecurity, classified by the IPC. No one cares. Or we do, but we don't know what to do about it. And here is UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini. Now, it's about a 60-minute clip. You can watch it for yourself, but it simply says the stories are absolutely harrowing. This is CNN reporting it. We're just eating animal fodder and to keep us alive, is what he's talking about in regard to people in Gaza. Now, Francesca Albanese says by continuing to starve Palestinians in Gaza, Israel does deepen resentment around the world, as well as its responsibility and that of its accomplices for genocide. However, the global rise of extremism, including in liberal democracies, just demonstrates that one does not need to be starved to become extremist. I mean, it's worrisome right now that we are seemingly watching this, normalized is a word you could call it, but I don't know how you're ever going to normalize what we know we're seeing. You just become desensitized to it, right? But what she's talking about is a time where we're literally slowly getting to a point to where, Hayat al-Sham, their Assad was worse, and like open terrorists are taking power. Israel is literally committing genocide, and we're just all goose stepping forward. I'm telling you, my thought on it is because of the partisanship. I'm telling you, that's why in this country we are unable to make that change. Eyes on Palestine adds to the famine point and simply shows that several Palestinians in Gaza, and we just reported, by the way, that people were, I think, deliberately given spoiled food, and they ate it anyway because they're desperately starving, and many of them, I think 50 plus people got sick while they're starving to death, and then maybe got bombed later. This is the world they're living in. The point is, on top of that, several Palestinians in Gaza were poisoned after consuming a toxic substance left by Israeli forces, mistaking it for cheese. So when we get into the conversation of testing new weapons and torturing people, there's a lot going on that we don't know about. And I am absolutely convinced that what they're doing is experimentation in a lot of different ways, which, by the way, has been covered pretty extensively over the years that they've been doing to Gaza for a long time. So now we saw the examples of putting out little cans that look like food that are bombs that children fall for, and they've been opening them and exploding themselves. There's literally no explanation other than they do that to kill children, guys. That's what they're doing. In this case, they're setting out food around starving people that's not food. It's actually poison. Democracy. It says the Director General of the Ministry of Health in Gaza stated that on November 27th, the occupation deliberately places the substance near bottles of water and drinks in a region suffering from hunger. Residents unaware of its nature consumed it, raising urgent concerns about the use of such materials as potential weapons against civilians. And he goes on to explain and give you more breakdown of this, but it's not surprising at all. Maran Barghouti points out that the Palestinian Authority is now stepping up, which, by the way, you shouldn't be surprised about if you've watched this platform, and executing people in West Bank. Now, the point is that Robert's been telling you this a long time. This is from July 19th, 2023, but he's written about it many times on this platform. This one just simply says, Israel's attack on Jenin failed, so Tel Aviv uses the Palestinian Authority to do its dirty work. The PA is not a friend of Palestine. It's the illusion they use to argue Palestinians are represented when it's just enforcer for Israel, essentially. So it doesn't have to be looking like it's doing all the work and ultimately risking its people. And, it's very clear. Read the article. He does a good job explaining it. She writes, the situation is horrifying. The Palestinian Authority has cut off electricity from Jenin refugee camp, and a child has been shot moments ago. His name is Mohammed Miri. According to his family, he's in surgery, but his fate remains unknown. The PA is targeting resistance groups at the behest of Israel, and in the process, killing civilians, killing children. Now, remember, they're the ones already pretending like that somehow might be a good solution for people taking control after they have it all sewed up, they think. Hopefully they're wrong. Dan Cohen points out, never forget how they lied about October 7th to incite genocide against Gaza. And he includes one of his posts from November 10th, 2023. Watch, quote, 40 beheaded babies, the lie that kicked off Israel's genocide of Gaza. We can't ever forget how obvious that was and how everybody, partisan media, left, right, corporate media, every part of our government, lockstep, rolled out the narrative that they beheaded children on clotheslines, children in an oven, stomach cut open. Every one of those were lies, without question, verified by Israeli media itself. Never forget that, guys, because it seems that, the point is, if it's clear that they don't care about obvious genocide being proven, that they knew these were lies too, they didn't care. We just need to begin to see what this truly shows us about what world we live in. We are not run by people that care about these things. They pretend to because they think they know we do. Now, even in Israeli media, but in this case, BBC, but this is a very prominent conversation in the Israeli media is next. Netanyahu aide is investigated over October 7th document changes. This is from November, last month. They're basically arguing that they're hiding information about what they knew. Here's more specific from Times of Israel. Lapid says, point blank, Netanyahu knew for months before October 7th that a violent eruption was looming. So I have one point to make about that, if you think that's the case, which seems like one of the very clear possibilities, is that it makes sense to argue that Netanyahu wouldn't have expected what actually happened. More so that he sort of lost control of the event and then just ordered Hannibal directive and it all went sideways, right? Because I think he recognized he was losing control. And maybe that's because of other groups other than Hamas that came through, because that's what happened too. But I mean, who knows? The point is, it wouldn't make sense to me the way that went down. I mean, it's certainly possible. These people are pretty disgusting, but ultimately that was what they would lay out as the plan. But ultimately that they did want them to take advantage of something so they could then point to that action to justify what they're doing now. But something went awry, whether there's elements of Hamas that weren't along with their plan or maybe the Palestinian Islamic Jihad came in and ruined their plans. The point is that something went awry. It seems that way. And they shut it down, ordered Hannibal directive and started killing everybody in sight. And that then just went full blow with the narrative anyway. Went after Hamas and it didn't work for a second. But now even they're pointing out that he knew it was coming. So you have to consider that they let it happen for some reason or some other overlapping narrative. But you can't keep pretending like the narrative that the U.S. Western media is pushing is the truth when every single element is telling you the otherwise. And by the way, proving it. The evidence is so overwhelmingly clear going back to the days following October 7th. I mean, I've almost seen never, even COVID-19, I believe this story rivals how ridiculously obvious it is. COVID-19, as much as it still gets pushed back, was very, very clear, I think, for a while with their own data showing it was deadly. In this case, I mean, I think it takes the cake. Now, you forget why it's clear that they would lie and cover these things up, even hurt their own people. Refresh yourself on what Zionism is. Zachary Foster, with a PhD in Palestinian history from Princeton, breaks down 8 different threads. He put them all together in one long master thread. So good on him. He's doing great work. 8 threads on Zionism. 1, brief history of Zionism. 2, Zionism and colonialism. 3, Zionism and racism. 4, Zionism rejected rescuing Jews from persecution. Number 5, doing Zionism quietly. Number 6, anti-Semitic Zionists. Number 7, Zionists staging anti-Semitic incidents. And number 8, Jewish rejection of Zionism. Very important. Does a great job on this. You can see they're very extensive too, each one of these. Now, lastly, before we go into some parts about Syria, Howard Beckett points out Francesca Albanese at the UN had some pretty strong words to say about basically calling out everybody in the room for why they continue to sell narratives like 40 beheaded babies. And what we're going to talk about is how it's very clear how everyone sees this, and that everywhere in the world, you have power structures that are choosing to ignore this or you're choosing to acknowledge it. And that's the line we have to recognize. And here's what he's calling out people in the UN.
I always experience a sense of shock and delusion when I come to this room, because many of you recited the same script that you had in front of yourself last year. Of course we condemn Hamas attack. Of course we express solidarity with the Israeli victims. Of course we demand the release of the hostages, both the Israelis and the Palestinians. But is it possible that after 42,000 people killed, you cannot empathize with the Palestinians? Those of you who have not uttered a word about what is happening in Gaza, demonstrate that empathy has evaporated from this room. And empathy is the glue that makes us stand united as humanity.
Now, as well as the world, it's important to highlight that Israel is very self-aware that we see them. Here's some examples. Max Blumenthal points out another tacit confession: the IDF is conducting the Holocaust of our time. The Henry Job Foundation has really shaken the Zionist genocide regime. Mossad Commentary puts this out. It says, please share. 2 soldiers of the IDF, do not post a picture of yourself in the battlefields of Gaza or anywhere else. And they're doing it anyway because they're a bunch of children. Do not even post at all on social media. They're not listening. There's a group that their job is to identify IDF soldiers and send the information to countries that you may be visiting at some point, or maybe you're from, because many of them are not from Israel, and you may be arrested. Your vacation will turn into a nightmare. So even if you want to argue that they are of the mind they're unjustly being accused, they're very aware that the world sees them as genociders. I think clearly they know what they're doing. The point is, don't do that because you're going to go to jail. They know. And I think what's interesting is, what's the point? It was, the group. So he's arguing that this is more so this group, which I guarantee is playing a role in that. But I actually think more so that people like Yunus Tarawi, who are just, very clearly on their trail. And even as the international community has been using his post to lay their case out for genocide, because he's not just showing you the video. He's literally tracing it back to, like, because it's on their accounts. He's getting their information. He's attacking it to where they are. He's proving what group they're in. He's nailing it to the wall. And that's why they're doing that. They're worried they're going to go to jail. Good. On top of that, Craig Murray points out, Starmer in the UK gave, quote, special immunity to the chief of staff of an army committing genocide and invading 3 nations so that he could come and discuss UK help to Israel to continue genocide. The point, if they did not know that he was guilty, they would not have needed to give immunity, guys. Now, again, you could argue that Starmer just disagrees, that they're not genocidal, but that's not how that works, right? Obviously they can have their own opinion, but in the context of international law, they can choose to decouple themselves from the ICC and the ICJ. That would be one of the moves possible. They won't do that because that would remove their position. The point is that you are part of that group and you've signed on to acknowledge how that works, which is when these things happen, then you're obligated to take effect and arrest them when they come through your area. Either way, you could argue that he doesn't think that they're actually guilty, but he knows that we all do think that. That's why he had to do that. I don't think that could be any more clear. So let's talk about Syria. There's a lot to get into that I don't think should take us that long. I just wanted to reiterate some of the points. Remove that video. There we go. Some of these points that we talked about during my interview with Vanessa. Let me just grab the screen share here for the Syrian parts. Here we go. So I have really 2 important interviews with Vanessa recently, and I hope you'll check it out. First one was on December 1st, the truth about what's happening in Syria, which had a lot of good, important information that I think is still relevant to the base of this story, which has very clearly, because at this time in this conversation, we were still wondering whether this was really happening, which was a fair thing to argue, because at first, it really was a psychological arm of this whole thing. There were real people, there were real elements, but as Vanessa proved in real time, there was entire things that were being framed on Twitter by largely mainstream alternative media elements that were completely false. Some of which, interestingly, actually later came to pass, which shows me something, right? That there's more overlapping influence coming from elements like Israel, the United States, and groups involved in what's happening there. Either way, the point was that it ended up becoming very real, right? But at the time, there was an element of this that was using misinformation and shock value, all sorts of stuff. Oops, I just ruined that. Yeah, dang it. There we go. But then we followed up on the 13th of December, entitled "The U.S. and Israeli-Backed Regime Change in Syria and Its Zionist Beneficiary." And, it's even just as people acknowledge in the chat, like it's starting out, like it's hard. Vanessa seems very, you could see this is drained on her. Which, I can't even imagine what it must be like for somebody that's been fighting for the cause of what she believes in and having watched these clearly corrupt elements just roll in and destroy everything. But of course, the other elements too is that what actually happened. I can see that it's weighing on a lot of people. What happened with Assad, what happened with Russia, we still don't seem to know. I'll make a couple points about that in a second. But this conversation is important because we break down what we can prove at the time. And right about now, it still kind of seems to be mostly what we can prove from this discussion. Going through some of these things that they're important, here's what Vanessa said on the 14th. The collective West punished the Syrian people for 14 years with terrorist invasion, barbaric sanctions, and occupation of Syrian essential energy resources. Now, right there alone is always the same in every conversation. Like with Venezuela, like with even Bolivia was the same case, or what's a better example? Like Syria is still ongoing, Iran in a lot of ways, that they destroy in every way they can the ability for the country to succeed, and then turn around and claim it's their fault for why that's happening. Even though it's so transparent, But seemingly everything else is the same way right now. They don't even care if we see it. All they need is their screamers to say the same thing. And it says the Syrian people were deliberately deprived of electricity, fuel, water, food, livelihood, which, by the way, I think I even put next. No, not yet, I guess. It's in here somewhere. The point is that they deprived them of all these things while Assad was in power. You know, whatever you want to pretend, whether you think he's elected or you think he's some dictator, which I just don't think is the reality of what you can see in his history, despite lies they've tried to force. Either way, the point is that they put in place after he's gone a group that they actually have registered as a terrorist organization, who is a very clear ISIS Al-Qaeda element. And then immediately they start sending food and water. And that's what happened. Why? Because they clearly support what's happening, guys. There's no way around it. These are terrorists, and they put them there, and they want that. What's very clear to prove is that they did not care whether Syrians suffered until they got what they wanted. These are not good people. Refugees were accepted with, and to be clear, they're giving them things they need in this case, at least in some reality. They're giving them, but I can guarantee that's being centrally controlled by the elements they put in power, which is usually how that works. And then probably getting all sorts of sexual manipulation and bribery and to get food. That's how that works. But they're still giving food to people. My point is that in many cases, that is just to make it seem like now it's going to be better, right? Which we saw in Libya and places where people going, yay, life is going to be better because the U.S. took over and then immediately found themselves in an open slave market. And now many years later in Iraq and otherwise, they have many videos where they go, I wish I would have seen what happened. But one of the quotes was in the context of Saddam, I think it was, which ultimately was that he was happy it happened, but then he got replaced by thousands of Saddams because that's all they're doing. They just want their controller. And usually they're far, far worse than the person that's in power because the reason they usually want to manipulate that person is because they're unwilling to completely bow to what they want from them. Not always in the interest of the people, but either way, the point is we're going to destroy it until we get what we want. Over and over and over. Refugees were accepted without question in the EU countries, even though many were from the same extremist factions destroying Syria for 14 years on behalf of Israel, US, UK, EU, Turkey, and Qatar allies. You know, by the way, the same refugees that the Republican elements are pointing to look, a Muslim invasion. Oh, you mean the ones you funded and then drove into foreign countries and then justify? Yeah, manufacturing consent, weaponized immigration. They're going to use it to force a digital ID down your throat. It says, without question into EU, and it goes on to say, now that the same sectarian drugged up terrorists have taken power, we are hearing the West talk about lifting sanctions, removing Hayat al-Sham from terrorist list, removing the bounty of $10 million off the leader of that terrorist organization, releasing resources. EU is closing borders to Syrian refugees now under genuine threat of death and persecution from the Hayat al-Sham-led terrorist groups. At the same time, they're paying former refugees $1,000 to return to Syria to be with the transitional terrorist regime. Think about that. They don't care about you. I think that's just transparent. Turkey and Qatar are reviving the U.S.-backed pipeline that Assad turned down in favor of the Russian-Iranian option back in 2009. If you can't see how this works yet, now I definitely think the pipeline plays a major role, but I don't think that's the primary objective. Dan Cohen points out in 2012, as we've pointed out before, Jake Sullivan emailed Hillary Clinton and said, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. There's many examples of this. A week ago, anyone who pointed out the obvious fact that this relationship still existed was denounced as an Assadist. Now, Blinken confirms, as we showed you yesterday, the U.S. is openly coordinating with Hayat al-Sham, Al-Qaeda. When will supporters of the, quote, revolution admit they're on the same side as the U.S. and Israel? Probably never, because they'll never openly let you make that case. They'll always give you a narrative that makes it feel like you weren't wrong, and that's how partisans are easy to manipulate. Blinken reveals the U.S. is in direct contact with Syrian rebels, otherwise known as terrorist groups. But rebels, when they like to point at them like they were rebels when they were working with Idlib and fighting Assad, and they were moderate rebels when Obama was fighting Assad. But you break away from that story for 10 seconds, and it's like, well, we can see that they're terrorists. Or in Idlib, Brett McGurk, largest Al-Qaeda hotspot since 9/11. Oh, wait, never mind. Now they're civilians because we want to protect the narrative. Every time. And Rami Abdul from the Euromed Human Rights Group is pointing out that Netanyahu, while we're over here pretending like these narratives make sense, is openly rolling out plans to settle Gaza. Syria. The government unanimously approved Netanyahu's plan to encourage settlement in Syria, which, by the way, I don't even know how that's surprising to anybody. Not only has it repeated itself in every country they claim they're fighting bad guys in, but realistically, it's everything that they've been telling you they're going to do. If you listen to the corporate media and the mainstream alternative media that give you the narrative they want you to think to make you ignore the reality, then you probably wouldn't know this. But if you look at anything else, if you look at people that have been covering the history of this, like Vanessa Beeley or Dan Cohen, Karoka Macy, and the reality of the occupation that's already been going on, the illegal occupation of Golan Heights, the reality that they have open documents showing what parts of Syria they want to take, or the Greater Israel Project at large, it's very clear this was always the plan. And we've been proving that for a very long time. The problem is that people just clutch their pearls and scream racism. Netanyahu says, quote, strengthening the Golan means strengthening Israel. The Golan is Syrian territory. And he says, and this is crucial during this period. We will continue to hold on to, develop, and settle it. And that's just a statement. The point is this is actually being reported as very clearly happening. Israel strikes Syria as Netanyahu approves plan to expand the Golan Heights settlement, which basically means taking over Syria. You can read it for yourself. It's not mincing words. The reality is obvious that they're going to expand as far as they think they need to keep themselves safe, even though they are the threatening element in this conversation. Because let's be clear, they're not fighting Hayat al-Sham. That's already been made very clear. And I'll make a point about that in a second. It's their element. They're the ones giving them medical treatment, giving them funding, giving them everything, along with the United States. Now, as we said yesterday as well, Israel is currently actively ethnically cleansing parts of Syria, like we told you would happen. Ordering evacuations of villages, settlers gradually following. And he makes the same point. Sound familiar? It's the same plan because this is what has always been the objective. They will gradually continue this incremental expansion, he writes, until they connect to their allies in the Druze enclave of Sweda. At some point, an autonomous Druze statelet will be proposed as an Israeli proxy. It's all going to plan. Meanwhile, the brain-dead mob still thinks that the Western Israeli-backed al-Qaeda takeover of Syria is a democratic revolution. And here is part of these elements. Now, I want you to take note of the way they're dressed. Okay, it's interesting to me. And it says, we received orders from America and Turkey not to come near minorities. Interesting, even though we know that's happening, which we'll show you right here, already very clearly happening. And I want to point these out. Look at what they're dressed like. Okay, here's a post. These are IDF sitting in Syria. There you can see because of the flag on the wall. They're in just like they're doing everywhere else, stealing, spray painting. Here's that right there. You can see. Oh, here. Where was it? Oh, it's right there. There on the wall. So like spray painting, graffiti all over their homes. But if they're liberating Syrians, why are they doing that? Why are they destroying their homes? Why are they bulldozing areas inside of Syria? Why? Obviously, if you're paying attention, you already know why. Because they're taking over Syria for new illegal settlements because their plan has been to take all this territory for themselves. Look at how the IDF is dressed. Okay? Now look at this IDF member with an ISIS patch. I mean, I didn't need to convince you guys. You already probably know this, but hopefully we're going to catch somebody out there that didn't see the connection, and they are openly killing these people. This is an open assassination. This is covered by even corporate media, but of course what they're saying in the corporate media is, look at these Assad regime stooges that are being executed. These are civilians. There's no indication in any context other than what they're saying that these are Assad regime elements. What you can prove is that these are IDF members by the way they're dressed, and they're working in conjunction with Hayat al-Sham and Israel and the United States and Turkey on the ground. And they're wearing ISIS patches, which, by the way, shouldn't even be shocking if you've been paying attention at all. You see ISIS patches popping up on the Azov movement. You see ISIS patches popping up on Turkish elements. You see ISIS patches in Idlib because they're working with them. It shouldn't be that difficult. But I know it's people just don't want to see it. It's hard. And here is Israeli TV. Just like before, back when this started, October 7th forward, here they are again telling you the truth. Because it's obvious that this is what, in Israel, this is public conversation. And your people and your leaders in the U.S. don't know that. No, they very, very clearly know what's going on. They're lying to you. Here, their media is saying it's true. They're extremists and Al-Qaeda, but they are better because Assad was arming Hezbollah. Okay, but wait, so you're not fighting a war against radical extremism? Got it. You're working with it. Got it. Okay. Just like everywhere else, by the way. Just like the funding of Hamas or funding of elements all over the U.S. government and Israel have been funding the most radical elements of what they claim they've been fighting for decades. On the record, you can easily prove it to this day. And no, that's what they're telling you. Oh, we don't care about the extremists. We just didn't like Assad because he's arming our enemies, like you are all around the world, arming the people that you're using to fight other countries that you covet. Here, as I showed you the other day, BM's pointing out this Masonic Chabad he calls lunatics sitting in Syria, reading their religious scripts. And, the point is, it's already happening, guys. These aren't IDF members. Why in the world are they in Syria? Because they're beginning, just like we saw in Lebanon, just like we saw in Gaza, to incrementally encroach into the area because that was the design. And they've been promised. Tiberia says Israel has bombed Syria over 500 times since Assad fell and has annexed land 6 times the size of Gaza. But you won't hear that on mainstream media. They haven't said a critical word because our mainstream journalists, in quotes, are merely mouthpieces for the criminal regime. Now, here, while they're bombing all those locations and literally taking land and arming their radicals to go in and murder whoever's not, whoever they decide, here's what he says today. Israel not interested in confrontation with Syria. That's all you got to do. And you're going to get the Starmers and the Matt Millers and the Blinkens and the Corbys and the Bidens and the Trumps coming out and saying he wants peace. He's supporting the revolution of Syria while he's literally executing people in the streets or funding those that are, like everywhere else. The Cradle points out, Israeli Prime Minister's office announces the government's approval of Netanyahu's plan to expand illegal settlements throughout the Golan Heights. That should have been a few tweets back. I didn't grab that. Now, Kavor Galmasian points out, as for all those that want to pretend like, well, we know that Israel's involved, we know the U.S. is involved, but we know Assad was a bad guy, so let's just see how it plays out. Well, certainly that shouldn't be your decision. But overall, historically, we have every single reason to expect that it will not. What happened in Afghanistan? What happened in Iraq? What happened in Libya? Well, here's an example. Here's a map of Libya after 14 years of NATO's regime change war. She says, I'm sure Syria will be different. What'd they do? They broke it up. Balkanized location ruled by different supported elements of the U.S., the UN, Israel, foreign elements. And it's being exploited incredibly. Now, what's interesting, when you look at a map right now, what do you see? Do you see these 3 or 4 different carved out locations? No, you see Libya. You know why? Because they control information. And so they don't want you to recognize that Libya doesn't exist anymore, that it's ultimately a broken up location that is being sold out to the highest bidder for their interests. Warring factions with open slave markets or, whatever the hell's going on today. It's not what it was. The location with the highest quality of life in all of Africa, free education, free healthcare, and plenty of other problems like most places. But it was also not this destroyed location. They have made it that for their interest by claiming they liberated it. I just think it's incredible that even honest people have a hard time acknowledging what the history shows us. As I jokingly said before, let's just even say for fun that they were trying to do good, which I don't even know how you could think that, but it's for fun. Maybe we should step up and go, hey, guys, pump the brakes, okay? I know you're trying to free people, but you're batting 0, okay? You keep stumbling over something and causing chaos, so maybe you should stop trying to help people. But I think we know that's not what they're doing. But somebody who tries and destroys countries over and over and over and over, maybe we should go, hey, stop trying. Let somebody else give it a go. You get the joke. The point is they're not trying to help anybody. But either way, it's obvious that we shouldn't let them keep going. Syrian Girl points out the Druze religious authority has now come out to say that there's apparently a viral video going around that was claiming they want to join Israel, which based on the recent conversation about the Iron Dome bomb that killed all those kids playing soccer that was a Druze community that they lied about. And Netanyahu shows up to pretend like he's there to help, and they literally kick him out. They say, we aren't in Israel because it's Syria they're talking about. Well, here, the Druze community put the video out, claiming that they were lying, that they're loyal to Syria. And the reality is this happens every time. They float some illusion that gets the blind followers out there to think we're on the right side. See, the Syrian people want them there, but they don't. From Russia, weirdly still not seemingly commenting on Assad or anything else, which I don't know. I just don't know how to read that. I can't tell if that means that there's a shoe about to drop when it's ready or that they're part of it. Maybe Assad's not even alive. Like, I just don't understand how they could possibly not address this by now unless there's some bigger thing going on. But Maria Zakharova came out and said their evidence will reveal that the U.S. and Israel were involved in the coup, which anybody with objective, anybody with eyes should be able to recognize that they're involved. Israel's in Syria right now. The U.S. and Israel have been supporting the group that's there. They're both telling you, I don't even think I have to explain that. Douglas McGregor says, if anyone believes the United States did not play a role in the removal of Assad in Syria, I've got a vacuum cleaner to sell you. He says, we have had people on the ground working to remove Assad since 2011. Exactly. It's exactly the case. Now, we also have the example that Turkey, according to Al Jazeera anyway, has 4,000 Turkish citizens that are technically working with the IDF in Syria. I think that's just important to consider in this weird overlap. Right now, I'm not even sure how I want to place Turkey in the overarching dynamic here, because Turkey, I think, recently just made a move I was just reading about. Actually, I can't remember exactly what the context was. Oh, it was a deal. That at least reported they made some larger deal with Iran. It's just all these things. I honestly continue to think and this is just a complete broad overview of just my opinion with what I'm seeing, that Turkey continues to be the anomaly that plays everybody. Right? They're a NATO ally, but they seem to take whatever action they can to bet, which I guess outside of anything criminal or murdering people or just occupying territory, why wouldn't they? What's interesting, though, is that they don't seem to get pushback from anybody. Israel, it's very strange. But Vanessa seems to point out that they have a lot more overlap with Israel than they want people to know. Now, Jerusalem Post reports that Israel has no more excuses for entering Syria. Rebel leader Jolani says in front of major TV interview, I pointed this out the other day, this was yesterday. But the point is, you're saying this publicly. They have no excuse to come into Israel. But the reality of what they're really saying is pretty weak. I lost the highlighting here, but I think it was right here. It says, this is Jolani, again, even though he's now calling himself Al-Shara, which is very by design to get you to disconnect the names with Al-Qaeda. But he says, we are not looking to engage in a conflict with Israel and cannot bear such a battle. I made your point yesterday. Does that sound like what you'd expect from a terrorist group or anybody? That you're basically making it clear that we can't bear to fight with such a strong Israeli army, which that doesn't seem to be the case at all. In fact, to me, that screams Israeli propaganda. That you can't just be like, we want to work with them. You have to push it further to make it almost clownish. To make the group that just took over Syria to be like, we can't bear because they're so strong. I don't think anybody's thinking that right now outside of Israel. So scream something to me. But either way, we know they're working on behalf of the U.S. and Israel, so that says something. But he says, we're not looking to engage in conflict with Israel. So on one hand, you're saying they've got no reason to keep doing this, but you've already made it clear you haven't pushed back as they pinpoint targeted all of the infrastructure of Syria, all the military locations, all of the Navy, and you just stood there. Even though that's your stuff, technically. Or as I pointed out with Vanessa, why wouldn't they have taken this stuff? Or, it just seems all of it was destroying Syria so it could be recreated. That's what they're doing. Greater Israel. And I even think you're going to end up seeing conflict a little bit about whether Turkey or the U.S. want to give up parts. I think Israel's designs on most of Syria. And if you look at their map, that's the case. There's no part in there where they give Turkey some part in the north, which is what they seem to be discussing. So we'll see how that works out. Overall, the point is that they're demonstrating that they're backing down, which does not make sense with every narrative we've been told about the radical Muslim elements that want to destroy you for your freedom or whatever narrative it is. Now, yes, they're telling you these groups have now been moderate now. They're now diversity-friendly jihadists, which is actually what they're saying. But they're also pointing to the groups that are wearing ISIS patches. So the point is that's not true. That's obvious. True that they're moderate. But here's Iran, or rather through Press TV and through the IRGC chief, saying Syria will be liberated. Now, he doesn't necessarily say he'll do it himself, but he does say the occupied areas of Syria will be liberated by the zealous Syrian youth. Do not doubt this will happen. That kind of gives the indication that they may work with that, which they have in the past. But it says America's foothold will not last either. By God's grace and power, the U.S. will also be expelled from the regions by the resistance front. So there's a lot of dispute about Iran's part in this, whether they sold them out, whether they were told to leave. Either way, he seems to be still taking a stand against these elements and saying that Syria should be free. Could just be narrative. Syrian Girl points out that Turkish accounts about what has happened in Qatar was that they threatened Russia and Iran not to save Syria. So that's interesting. So Turkish media is claiming that Russia and Iran were threatened not to, which in a way does kind of make sense, but why they would have been backed down by a threat, who knows? But he says Turkey convinced Russia and Iran not to provide military support to Assad. Now, this is just complete speculation statements from Turkish media, which we should not take at face value. It says our meetings in Ankara and Doha, Turkey and Qatar, were devoted to this issue. Negotiations were held, and that night we received a phone call after which Assad left, which, by the way, aligns with what Sputnik said. It says if the Syrian regime had received support, things could have ended very bloodily. The Russians and Iranians realized that continuing this was no longer made sense. Now, that's his statement. I would argue that realistically, should they have stood this, not back down, that this wouldn't have happened. Unless the U.S. went full blow on this, but then that probably would have. I mean, let's be real here. If Russia was not standing down and Iran was not, I don't think even the U.S. involvement would have been able to overtake that. But either way, they did, and now here we are. And Turkey's simply claiming they were threatened not to. Now, you could argue that's a way to give them kind of a pass. But I don't think we should continue to assume based on more assumption until we get more information. Because right now it seems completely opaque. Now, rapidly going through this since it's been covered to death, I just think it's important, again, if you haven't seen it, to recognize that this report, let's even see if it has it on there now. It is there. See, the fact check from Twitter. Isn't it funny how the fact check was something we laughed at until now Twitter does it? So now it's a good thing. Verify Psy. It says a Syrian fact-checking group now says this man is Air Force Intelligence First Lieutenant Salma Mohammed Salma, notorious for extorting and theft in Homs, who had been arrested due to disputes with his colleagues about profit sharing. So interesting. So what's very telling to me is that this is now Twitter's fact check that's now starting to drift back the other direction to make it suggest that, yeah, he was arrested, but maybe for the right reason. Okay, to be very clear, the amount of information I've seen around this story, the ridiculous propaganda sense of the whole thing, the way they framed it, and this girl and Clarissa Ward being a part of it. I mean, every part of this seems to scream completely fake. The fact that the guy is not diminished, he's not pale, he's not emaciated. I mean, skin color. I mean, I'm referencing what experts have said who know what people look like when they've been held. Or the point they make that people apparently hadn't been there for 4 to 5 days and apparently were pretending he survived with no water and food. There's nothing about this that makes sense. So I find it very telling. Here's what it said before that. The Syrian former detainee notes inconsistencies. Communal cells were not used for individual purposes, which they claim that's where he was. The cells appear unusually clean, and the prisoner's energy level seems inconsistent with claimed 5 days water deprivation. And there's others that came out and just flatly said this is proven to be false. This is kind of interesting how this system, so all it really means is if you've got enough bots, you can influence what that says. That's all the fact check means on Twitter, because now you're just getting this bad. Really, it should be something that constantly changes diametric opposites. That doesn't make much sense to me. But either way, the point is that this is, I think, provably fake. And as Rachel Blevin says, wait. So this guy somehow missed several days of prisons being raided and wasn't until CNN crew just randomly found him that they realized he was free. I mean, it's cartoonish. And then, by the way, comes out and then stares directly at the sun. Come on. Anybody who's been in a dark room for 15 minutes knows that's not what would happen, but whatever. Ona Bertrand, same points. I'm going to skim past it. He made, I always like his takes. He seems a very intelligent person. But Angelo pointing out what a real detained person looks like. That's the guy who was taken. This is what he looked like when Israel released him. And this guy is what was released from this prison. Seemingly almost gained weight, or overweight, rather. Max saying the same thing. And then references, this is funny. This is another, remember this one? Where she literally smells the bag that's suspected of sarin or whatever it was. And then goes, my nose was stinging. which is probably why you never saw her again, but you're pretty much in any real context, because that's so stupid. And they're lying. They must know they're lying. And Caitlin Johnstone points out this very, very, very well documented, very broken down deception. The what is it? What's her name? Oh, she writes it up here. It's oh no, I guess not. Something Abad. What is it? It doesn't even matter at this point. You know, the girl, the young Syrian girl that basically was reading scripts and they asked her questions and she basically was responding with stage. I mean, the point was this was broken down to be utterly fabricated, as well as the child in the back of the ambulance. Remember that with the blood in his face, that the father came out later and said they bribed him with food and they made him look like that. I mean, it's crazy. If you have to fake all of this, clearly it's not at least what they're claiming. Same with every other location we're talking about. And then here is Sam Stein from MSNBC. This may be one of the most profound pieces of TV cable journalism I've seen in ages. Or a complete lie. You know, whatever. Apples, oranges. It's just funny that, Bana, thank you. Her name is Bana. I mean, just seems like a pretty dumb thing to say off something that wasn't that. I mean, anyway, it's just these people are circling the wagons, it seems. And then here's another example of one that was in Lebanon. I think this was, I forget, yeah, it was basically they're making the joke. It's right after what she did. And they come to this guy in Lebanon and say that he was from Lebanon and held in Syria and that we are now helping you get released. And the guy literally later, that's not what happened. And literally proves it on camera. It's just, we went over this already. It's a 2-minute video. The point is ultimately lies upon lies upon lies. This one too, U.S. found wandering near Damascus after months in Syrian prison. And Craig Murray says the evidence that Travis Timmerman was detained at all seems distinctly dubious. At the most basic level, for a white man who's been locked inside for 7 months, in all photos, he's entirely the wrong color. No prison pallor or flabbiness. Huge amount of BS coming out of the media right now. They're manufacturing this stuff because they have to. Bryce Green points out that there's been a lot of talk about conditions of government prisons in Syria, but less about the sprawling network of U.S.-run prisons in northern Syria, where right this moment, 50,000 men, women, and children are kept in abhorrent conditions. You know why we know that? Amnesty International covered it. April 17th, 2024. Syria, aftermath, injustice, torture, and death in detention in northeast Syria. The autonomous authorities of the northeast Syria, with the support of the U.S. government and other members of the coalition to defeat ISIS, which is not what's happening, are engaged in a large-scale systematic violation of the rights of more than 56,000 men, women, and children in their custody. Why doesn't that matter? Well, you obviously know why. Because it's about the control of the narrative in the interest of their agendas. It's not about who's committing crimes. It's about who you can tell you, or who you can, I mean, in some cases there are crimes being committed. I was going to say frame them for, but the reality is that they are not about trying to hold people accountable. They're not trying to enforce human rights or international law. They are literally breaking all those things in the interest of their agendas and then using those as coercive tools to go after, in many cases, people not doing any of that. It's a very grotesque perversion of what we think we care about, or rather, I should say what we care about, what they pretend they care about. And this goes back for decades. I mean, you can see Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, the UN breaking down what Israel's been doing for decades. And then Wyatt Reed. Oh, that's interesting. They took away man, this is so funny. This platform works. Well, he screenshot it. How interesting. This platform is very strange. He says, leaked photos reveal brutal torture in Syria's Sadania prison. Retweet if you believe any regime that does this must be overthrown. Now, what's hilarious to me is it's very clear what he's trying to do. I mean, maybe not everybody picks it up by view, but obviously these are from, if you've been seeing them in the past, from Guantanamo Bay, conducted by the U.S. and Israel, or rather specifically Israel, or rather the United States and foreign allies. But Israel has a very clear connection to this with what we've seen in all of these actions and what they're doing. But what's interesting is that it seems like most people were like, that's Guantanamo, you moron. He's like, guys, like, clearly he knows that. Clearly what he's trying to do is get people who don't know that to be outraged and go, look at what Syria did. And then realize, oh, wait, that's my government. And then go, oops, have a short secret, a moment where your brain has to reconcile that. It works. And some people just choose to ignore it because they aren't interested in the truth. But somebody who actually is interested in the truth but has a block because of propaganda, that works. Where suddenly you're outraged going, how could anybody do this? Syria, Assad's a monster. And then going, oh, my people did. And then you just have a moment where you go, wow, okay. Like, if you're honest, that's a pretty gut check moment. Now, as the squirrel points out, they took videos of children and women they raped, and the U.S. still has those tapes, but refuses to give anyone access to them because, quote, that would inflame the region against us. That's real. They raped children who became pregnant and then killed them. Now, this is reported by The Guardian. Now, if you don't remember the disgusting realities of what went down at Guantanamo Bay and then realize why they were doing these things with conjunction with Israel and what we've seen them do in Gaza, again, I just don't think you want to see it. And I get why. It's horrifying. But here's what he points out. Can't get anything past these guys. And it says, these photos are from Iraq, Afghanistan war, and the people are committing torture and USA soldiers. Oh, so basically they're saying like he's wrong. He's making a joke because obviously that was the point. Now, Adam also points out that while they're all screaming about things that Vanessa Beeley has basically broken down as false around that prison, no one's talking about the rape that they had on video in Israel. Not anymore, anyway. Why didn't CNN travel to one of the Israelis' torture prisons? They're literally on camera raping a prisoner. But Western media have only just now rediscovered the torture is evil. Dan Cohen writes, what do Zionists think of Syrians? Listen to Rabbi Nachman Kahana, brother of the most influential rabbi in Israeli history, about how Syrian children are little snakes that should die. He says, congratulations, revolutionaries. You've just been used by people who want to exterminate you like they're doing to Gaza.
The issue today being discussed in Israel about the poor Syrian children who are subject to very inhumane conduct by the Syrian government. Question, should Israel take in these children or the adults? By the way, Israel has already treated thousands of Syrians in our hospitals. The Dutch...
Yeah, those are terrorists, guys. Even their own media has reported that. Those are Syrian Al-Qaeda, moderate rebels. But you see how they love to just blend the line when they want it to work for them? You know, like, innocent girls have been kidnapped. Oh, you mean those IDF members that were conducting torture? And yeah, not the same story. That's how this works.
Of our own citizens, because remember, you can only have one operation at a time. And I want to say something about this. It says in the Talmud that King Solomon, the wise of all men...
Just so you can see it real quick, in case you didn't know before. Israeli treating Al-Qaeda fighters and wounded Syrian civil war. That's how inherently dishonest these people are.
To him in a dream, a man who had legislation against a snake. What was the story? He comes to Solomon in a dream. They met the snake on the road. The snake was half dead. It was run over by a taxi or something. Dead. So I took the snake. I brought him home. I nursed him. I gave him milk, but the little thing dropper, and I made him strong again. As soon as he got strong, he bit me, and I died. Now I want the snake to be punished. And Solomon says to the snake, why did you do such a thing? And he says, because I'm a snake. That's what I am. There are big snakes and little snakes. Little snakes have little children there. But the snakes, they grow up to be big snakes.
Now that is exactly what, I'm blanking on his name now, member of parliament from Ireland. I have a clip that I've played in the past where he highlights plenty of Israeli elements literally calling the children in Gaza little snakes, and we should kill them. There's a reason for that. And I'm sure you can remember where else you've heard that analogy.
It'll be a nice little girl with pigtails, nice little boy. They'll grow up, have it, and they drink it with the milk of their mothers, that they hate the Jewish people. That's what you want to do?
It's disgusting.
Yeah. We're not killing anybody, but we have to go out of our way to save a little snake, and they don't come and will bite you. We're surrounded by very bad people in this part of the world.
Okay, so do you remember where else you've heard that? I think it's very relevant today.
Who has heard the poem called The Snake? So I have it. Does anybody want to hear it again? You sure? Are you sure? Okay. So let's dedicate this to General Kelly, the Border Patrol, and the ICE agents for doing such an incredible job. Right? You know what we're going to have called the snake. On her way to work one morning, down the path along the lake, a tender-hearted woman saw a poor, half-frozen snake. His pretty colored skin had been all frosted with the dew. Poor thing, she cried, I'll take you in, and I'll take care of you. The border. Take me in, oh tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, oh tender woman, sighed the vicious snake.
So don't miss the point that he's referencing immigrants coming into this country, usually because of belligerent foreign policy of the U.S. government, as the snake. That's when he pointed to the border. But the point people make is that this is, at least we should consider whether this is about him.
She wrapped him up all cozy in a comforter of silk and laid him by her fireside with some honey and some milk. She hurried home from work that night, and as soon as she arrived, she found that pretty snake she'd taken in had been revived. Take me in, O tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman, sighed that vicious snake. She clutched him to her bosom. You're so beautiful, she cried. But if I hadn't brought you in by now, oh heavens, you would have died. She stroked his pretty skin again and kissed him and held him tight. But instead of saying thank you, that snake gave her a vicious bite. Take me in, O tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman, sighed the vicious snake. I have saved you, cried the woman, and you've bitten me, heavens, why? You know your bite is poisonous, and now I'm going to die. Oh, shut up, silly woman, said the reptile with a grin. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in.
So what's the argument there based on the way he's presenting that? That all of them are snakes? Or that we should, it's a very gross overlap. And these are the points people make about why you can't just pretend like he doesn't mean that or you're misrepresenting what he said. There's a very clear point being made there. Now, it's very clearly from some analogy point meant to argue that these people are all dangerous. Either way, it's important to consider that's clearly the same story. And I think that's interesting. And the context of what he's saying is actually, the reason I think it's important to highlight is considering the main point from before, that the analogy applies equally to him or anybody else in these positions. If you read his books, if you look at what he's talked about, and same goes for Biden, damn near everybody in a political position that I can point to right now, they have examples of where they show you what they are, whether it's supporting genocide or supporting certain legislation. But the point is, we always give them a pass. We always want to rationalize because he said this nice thing or he wore this certain thing or because he, works with this certain guy. And the problem is that the analogy is the same. He told you what he was. Now, Dan Cohen, in regard to the point he was making a moment ago, covers this great discussion, the manufactured Middle East plight and the Zionism linchpin. We interviewed him on October 5th. Now that, again, it wasn't the video right there, but it was the point he played before it about the rabbi. And the point he's making is that this is what Zionists think of Syria, right? And the point of the interview is to highlight, as a Jewish person himself, that saying that is not secretly about Jewish people. He doesn't think that. He's talking about Zionism, and that's what that guy represents, whether he's Jewish or not. That's important. But Syrian Girl highlights the U.S. said Assad needs to go because he fired on protesters. And you've heard me talk about that many times, the complete deception that it was, just like it was in Venezuela, like it was in Afghanistan, like it was in Iraq. They do the same thing everywhere. Assad was not responsible for this. And again, that's very clear. We've gone over this in the past. But that's what they claimed. He shot innocent people in the protest. Number two, the U.S. backs Syrian Democratic Forces, otherwise known as terrorists. Number three, Syrian Democratic Forces fire on protesters. That's where we are, guys. This is happening as of the 12th. Protesters lining up and they're firing on them. It's the kind of thing that we keep seeing. It only matters when you can use it against someone they don't like. Now, in this case, we have Syrian refugees. This was on the 12th, who are fleeing to Lebanon. And I think it's important because it shows you, at least at some level, you've got people that recognize what's going on, that recognize that they're at risk because of what happened, whether or not they support Assad. And I think by and large, what I think I can see is that most people in Syria do not support what's happening, even if they didn't like Assad, mind you. And I think that's important. Now, ending in the last part here, Iran, bringing it back to the beginning and the drone and everything else, is very clearly being positioned. Or rather, Israel and the United States and everything else are positioning for the next step. Israel can now use Syrian airspace, Vanessa writes, to target Iraq and eventually Iran. The plan is to weaponize ISIS against all resistance factions in Iraq and to secure a U.S.-Israeli corridor that will border Iran. All this is and was facilitated by Hayat al-Sham, al-Qaeda terrorists, who, all along, have been given a free pass in the West because of their illusion of solidarity with Palestine. Is anything becoming clearer now? And an hour, 20 hours ago, 58 Israeli attacks in Damascus suburbs. Suburbs, guys. It's like they moved beyond bombing military installations. Now they're just murdering civilians in Damascus. If you're shocked by that, I don't think you've been paying attention. This is what they do. And whether that's because they want to punish Syrians for not acquiescing or because they're just villainous, psychopathic entities. Either way, doesn't matter. They're murdering civilians and they're on video bombing civilian locations when there's nobody fighting back. Guys, we're a week. I mean, more than that. We have clear evidence, as even corporate media has reported, that there's no resistance right now. Hayat al-Sham has basically stood back and they're on the same side anyway. There's nobody fighting. And so what are they bombing for? Now, even when it was military installations, it was still a crime. There was no resistance. Now they're bombing civilian locations in Damascus. Even if there was resistance, that would be a crime. But now we're at a point where you can prove in such vivid color that they're just bombing innocent people, and still the West supports them. Now, I said before, Israel's already claiming they see an opportunity to bomb Iran after the downfall of Assad. Netanyahu's already talking to the Iranian people. This is on the 12th. He says, your oppressor has spent over $30 billion supporting Assad in Syria. After only 11 days, he collapsed into dust. So he's already trying to get this narrative. Why would you be speaking to the Iranian people? That's a threat. That's what that is. This is he's beginning to roll this out and hoping. Now, whether this is them feeling like they have to rapidly go through this because they don't have much time or because they just think they can get away with it, I don't know. But it's so clear what they're doing is not in the interest of anything other than what they want to accomplish for their own interests. Aramate points out the thread from an Israeli pilot on how regime change in Syria has now made it easier to bomb Iran. It's all just having casual conversations. Despite talk of nuclear leap, little about Iran's enrichment program has changed. And simple point on that is that they're just simply pointing to the enrichment again. Which, by the way, they're not creating a bomb, as even the State Department said recently. But what this is about hyping what we already know, but for people that don't know that, and framing it as nuclear threat, which is exactly what they're using it for. Because here is Trump saying, we're considering preemptive strikes, otherwise called attacks, on a country not attacking you, for something they're not doing, which is nuclear war weapon development. So here's already the clearest indication that Trump is beginning the path for Israel's war, which, by the way, he tried to start during his administration. He assassinated Soleimani, and they didn't do anything. He tried to kick off war with Venezuela. I mean, rather could have with his actions. The point is very clear that the narrative was not the same. Had Iran responded, we'd be at a war with Iran right now. It's just easy to play you against these things, but what you want to believe. The truth is that they've always been in league with this. Trump transition team considering strikes on Iran. Antiwar.com breaks it down. We'll finish with this clip showing you what Netanyahu thinks terrorism is. Then stand back and look at what's happening today and tell me how it's different than what he's describing. But I'll leave it there for today. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Please be objective. Remain skeptical of all these things. I definitely think there's some things going on around this, but like I'm point being like real, like a drone conversation and others, like there's real elements of this. But I think we can all acknowledge that there's something very fishy about the way it's being used. So just pump the brakes. Recognize that there's partisan media everywhere, really desperate to get you invested in one thing or the other, whether it's because they're invested in an agenda or because they just want to grow their channel. And then there's plenty of people that aren't even partisan media that do that. That's everywhere. It's always been the case. But just be skeptical because I think it's at a fever pitch right now. In a very dangerous time where we're watching this technocratic revolution happen very quietly underneath everything else. They're positioning to go to war with Iran while claiming that what they're doing is spreading freedom and ending that conflict. I mean, it's obvious this is escalating while it should be going the other direction. Now, I've mentioned many times about what we need to think about and how we can affect that change while the momentum is there. How we roll that into something else, I hope we can ask. But continue to stand up and fight for these things, guys, because the people that are in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, many other locations that we're not even talking about are constantly suffering because of our governments, or rather the people pretending to be our governments and doing whatever they want for whatever agenda they're trying to accomplish. But it is still being seen as the United States, as Israel, as the people within that. Show the world that you don't believe this. Show the world that you do not align with these terrible things. It's important. Thank you for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
What terrorists do is target the innocent deliberately. Therefore, my definition of terrorism is the systematic and deliberate attack and murder, maiming, and menacing of innocent civilians.
Her name is Hind Brajab, and she was just 5 years old when she was killed with her family trapped in a vehicle.
You can tell a lot about terrorists, but what happens when they come to power? They end up as being masters of terrorist states.